After 3 years of agonizing fertility treatments, I stood at my family's Sunday dinner table and announced I was pregnant with twins. My mother did not congratulate me. She stabbed her roast beef, looked me up and down, and said, "Let us hope this one is smarter than you." My sister laughed. My father checked his gold watch and asked if we could eat now. I did not cry. I looked at my husband Marcus. He gave a slow nod. I stood up and pulled out a white envelope. It was a letter my obstetrician wrote specifically for this gathering. I began to read. The first 2 sentences were warm congratulations. The third sentence made my mother drop her silver fork. Her face turned ash white, and tears of sheer panic welled in her eyes. Before I tell you what that letter revealed, let me know where you are watching from. I am Maya, exactly 33 years old, Marcus an acquisitions lawyer, and I have been married 5 years. He rarely ever raises his voice, but when he speaks, people listen. We built a peaceful life together, separate from the constant drama of my childhood home. Growing up in a prominent African American family in Atlanta, appearances were everything. My father Thomas was head deacon at an influential church, while my mother Brenda ran the social committee. They were obsessed with looking like the perfect faithful family. Behind the closed doors of their sprawling brick house, they were deeply flawed and incredibly cruel. I was the family scapegoat. I was never quite religious enough, never quite stylish enough, and never quite obedient enough for their liking. My younger sister Chloe, a former college pageant queen, could do no wrong in their eyes. Her husband Spencer, a white finance guy who threw around buzzwords, was treated like royalty. My parents worshipped his tailored suits and investment portfolios. They let him disrespect Marcus, making snide comments about how my husband was just a regular lawyer, while Spencer built generational wealth. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Every Sunday, my parents lifted their hands in prayer at church, then came home to use Sunday dinner as an opportunity to tear me down. For years, I swallowed the insults and smiled through passive-aggressive comments about my career and marriage. I endured it to keep the peace and protect the family image. But the hardest thing Marcus and I faced was our struggle to have children. We endured 3 years of failed treatments. My mother dismissed my grief, claiming my negative energy was why I could not carry a child to term. Meanwhile, Chloe claimed she was also struggling with fertility. Whenever she shed a tear, my parents dropped everything to comfort her, reminding me how selfish I was for being sad about my own miscarriages. Last Sunday, Marcus and I received our miracle. I was 12 weeks pregnant with healthy twins. Naively, I thought this news would bring genuine joy to the family. I thought a new generation would soften their hearts. We arrived at my parents' house just as they got back from church service. The dining room smelled of fried chicken, collard greens, and freshly baked rolls. Chloe and Spencer sat across from Marcus and me, while my father took the head of the table and my mother sat opposite. Halfway through the meal, I tapped my water glass with my knife. I took a deep breath, feeling Marcus squeeze my knee for support. I announced we were expecting twins, and that everything looked completely healthy. I waited for the smiles, the gasps of excitement, the congratulations. Instead, silence fell over the dining room. Chloe rolled her eyes and took a sip of her mimosa. Spencer smirked and shook his head as if I'd just told a bad joke. My mother did not even look up from her plate. She forcefully stabbed a piece of roast beef, brought it to her mouth, and chewed slowly. "Let us hope this one is smarter than you," she said casually. Chloe let out a loud mocking laugh. My father, the esteemed deacon, who just spent 2 hours preaching family values, simply sighed. He tapped his gold Rolex. "Can we just eat now?" he complained. "Your sister had a hard week, and we do not need to make everything about you right now, Maya." A familiar burning shame tried to rise in my chest, the same shame I felt since I was a little girl. But this time something fundamental shifted inside me. I did not feel sad. I felt cold, absolute clarity. I looked at Marcus. He did not say a word, but his eyes were dark with quiet fury. He gave me a single deliberate nod. It was time. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound echoed loudly against the hardwood floor. I ignored my father's irritated groan. I opened my designer bag and pulled out a white envelope bearing the official crest of the medical clinic. Actually, before we continue eating, I have something else to share, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Dr. Sterling, my obstetrician, wrote a special letter for the family today. I unfolded the heavy paper. My mother rolled her eyes dramatically, preparing for what she assumed was a sentimental speech. I began reading aloud. The first sentence congratulated Marcus and me on our successful in vitro fertilization. The second sentence confirmed the twins were developing beautifully. But then I reached the third sentence. I read it clearly, making sure every single syllable landed perfectly in the quiet room. As the words left my mouth, the smug expression on my mother's face vanished instantly. Her fork slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly against her china plate. The color drained completely from her cheeks, leaving her face a terrifying shade of ash white. Pure panic widened her eyes as she stared at me, realizing the facade she built was about to completely collapse. I did not lower my voice. I did not soften the blow. I read the third sentence with the clinical precision of a judge delivering a verdict. Furthermore, as a medical professional bound by ethics and the law, I must officially state that I am issuing a formal cease and desist order against your sister Chloe Hastings. The entire table froze. The clinking of silverware stopped. Spencer's smug grin vanished, replaced by a tight, confused frown. My father. Thomas gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. What are you talking about? My father demanded, his voice thick with sudden dread. A cease and desist for what? I looked directly at Chloe. She was shrinking into her chair, her eyes darting toward the exits as if calculating how fast she could run. For medical fraud, I said clearly. I looked back at the letter. Dr. Sterling writes, it has come to our clinic's attention that Chloe Hastings has been presenting forged ultrasound scans and medical records to your family, claiming to be a patient receiving advanced IVF treatments at our facility. Let me be clear. Chloe Hastings has never been a patient here. The records she has been showing your parents are in fact your own stolen medical files from your previous miscarriages, which she digitally altered. My mother let out a strangled gasp. She looked at Chloe, then at me, then back at Chloe. That is impossible, she whispered, her voice trembling. Chloe has been going to treatments every week. She showed us the sonograms. She showed us the bills. She showed you my sonograms, Mom. I fired back, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the center of the table. Those are the original files. Look at the dates. Look at the patient ID numbers. She just photoshopped her name over mine. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my mother. For 3 years you sat there and called me selfish. You told me my negative energy was why I kept losing my babies. You told me I needed to pray harder while you babied Chloe, while you cried with her, while you told me I needed to support my sister because her IVF journey was so hard. Lies! Chloe suddenly shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. She's lying. She forged that letter. She's always been jealous of me. You know, she hates me. Jealous. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the dining room walls. Jealous that you had to steal my trauma to get attention? I don't think so. I pulled out another document from my bag. It was a bank statement. I slapped it down right next to the forged medical records. This is what I'm really curious about, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You used my miscarriages to milk $300,000 out of Mom and Dad for these fake IVF treatments. $300,000, Chloe. So where did the money really go? Chloe's face crumpled. She buried her face in her hands and began sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders heaving with practiced theatricality. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. I was just so desperate to give you guys a grandchild. My mother immediately rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around Chloe's shaking shoulders. Oh, my sweet girl, it's okay. We understand. You were just hurting. I stared at them, disgusted but not surprised. Even now, faced with irrefutable proof of her deception, they were comforting her. They were protecting the golden child. But Spencer wasn't crying. His face had gone red, a vein throbbing in his temple. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He leaned across the table, towering over me, trying to use his size to intimidate me the way he always did. How dare you? Spencer bellowed, his voice dripping with venom. How dare you violate my wife's privacy like this? You think you can just hire some cheap private investigator to dig into our lives? You have no idea what you're talking about. I know she didn't spend $300,000 at a fertility clinic, I replied, unflinching. She gave that money to me, Spencer roared, pointing a finger directly in my face. She gave it to me to invest in a trust fund for our future children. I manage millions of dollars, Maya. I build generational wealth. Something you and your little paralegal husband here couldn't possibly understand. He sneered at Marcus, dismissing him entirely. You two are pathetic. You come in here with your fake outrage because you're jealous that I actually provide for my wife while you're stuck running some tiny catering kitchen. You'll never be on my level. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with tension. My parents watched, waiting for us to cower, waiting for Marcus to back down, just like he always did when Spencer went on his rants. But Marcus didn't back down. He didn't flinch. He slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. He adjusted his glasses, his expression completely unreadable. He reached into his briefcase resting by his feet and pulled out a thick black dossier. He dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. I am an M&A attorney, Spencer, Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm, cutting through the room like a scalpel. I specialize in corporate acquisitions and financial restructuring. I understand high finance perfectly. He opened the dossier. Which is why, Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto Spencer's panicked face. I know that your firm Vanguard Capital fired you 6 months ago for embezzlement. Spencer stood frozen. The aggressive lean he had used to intimidate me just seconds ago now made him look like a trapped animal. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his starched collar. The thick silence in the dining room was broken only by the sound of his rapid, shallow breathing. He tried to laugh, a dry and nervous sound that cracked in the middle of his throat. That is a complete fabrication, Spencer stammered. He tugged at his silk tie as if the room had suddenly lost its oxygen. I signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. I left Vanguard Capital voluntarily to pursue independent wealth management opportunities. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You are out of your depth. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply turned the first page of the black dossier and slid a crisp, watermarked document across the polished mahogany table directly toward Spencer. This is a certified copy of your termination notice, Spencer, Marcus said smoothly. It is dated October 14th. The cited reasons for your immediate dismissal include gross misconduct, unauthorized transfer of client assets, and a severe violation of your fiduciary duty. Vanguard Capital chose not to press federal charges solely because your parents liquidated their own retirement accounts to quietly pay back the firm and avoid a public scandal. You are not an independent wealth manager. You are a common thief. My mother let out a strangled gasp, clutching her hand over her chest. She looked desperately at Spencer, waiting for him to tear up the paper and prove Marcus wrong. She needed him to be the golden son-in-law she had bragged about to all her church friends. But Spencer just stared down at the document, his jaw working furiously as he searched for an excuse. This is highly illegal, Spencer hissed, his voice dropping an octave as his face flushed bright red. You hacked my private employment records. I will sue you for everything you own. I will have you disbarred. Public records and court filings are not private, Spencer, Marcus replied, completely unfazed by the threat. He turned to the next page in his folder. Now let us discuss the $300,000 Thomas and Brenda gave you for Chloe's fictional fertility treatments. You stood in this very room and claimed that money went into a secure trust fund for your future children. But there is no trust fund, is there? My father slammed his heavy fist down onto the dining table. The silverware rattled against the plates. Enough. I will not sit here and listen to you slander my son-in-law in my own home. Spencer is an aggressive investor. He takes calculated risks. You are just a cautious paper pusher, Marcus. You do not understand how real wealth is generated. I felt a physical sickness twist in my stomach, even now presented with a formal termination letter for embezzlement. My father was fiercely defending him. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. He did not invest the money, Dad. I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Stop protecting him and listen to what Marcus is saying. Marcus pulled a thick stack of printed bank statements from the dossier. He fanned them out across the table like a deck of cards. Bright yellow highlighters marked dozens of specific massive transactions. On November 2nd, $40,000 was wired directly to an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange. Marcus Reed methodically tracing the line with his pen. On November 15th, $65,000 was deposited into a digital sports betting platform based in Malta. Over the next 4 months, you systematically drained the entire $300,000. You lost every single penny on high-risk crypto gambles and online poker. The accounts are completely empty. There is zero balance remaining. The dining room felt like a vacuum. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands. Her fake theatrical tears were entirely gone, replaced by a look of genuine, unadulterated shock. She turned to her husband, grabbing his sleeve. "Spencer, what is he talking about? You told me the money was locked in a high-yield account earning 12% interest." "It was a temporary market dip," Spencer barked, pulling his arm away from her. Sweat was now visibly beading on his forehead and running down his neck. "If I had just had a little more capital to average down my positions, I could have doubled the initial investment. The market is rigged against retail investors. It was just bad timing." "You are not a retail investor," I fired back, leaning over the table and staring him down. "You are an unemployed gambling addict living off my parents' bank accounts." I turned my fury toward my mother and father. They sat in stunned, paralyzed silence, staring blankly at the highlighted bank statements spread out before them. The hypocrisy that had defined my entire life was sitting right in front of me, and I was absolutely done holding back to keep their fragile peace. "Look at him," I demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Spencer. "Look at the man you have worshipped for years. You treated him like a king because he is a white man in a tailored suit who uses Wall Street buzzwords to make himself sound important. You let him sit at this table every Sunday and disrespect my husband. When Marcus made partner at his law firm through sheer brilliance and hard work, you actually asked if they had to meet a diversity quota. When Spencer lost his job for stealing and started draining your retirement accounts, you called him a genius entrepreneur." My mother looked away, her face flushing with deep, undeniable shame. She could not meet my eyes. "You gave him a pass for everything," I continued, the anger pouring out of me in a relentless flood. "You overlooked every glaring red flag because he fit the aesthetic you wanted for your perfect country club family image. You literally funded his gambling addiction using money you thought was paying for my sister's fake babies. The babies she faked by stealing my actual medical trauma." Spencer's facade completely shattered. The arrogant, untouchable finance brother disappeared, leaving behind a desperate and cornered animal. He realized the money train was permanently derailed. He realized his secret was exposed to the only people still funding his lifestyle. "Give me those documents," Spencer snarled. He lunged across the dinner table with a wild shout, knocking over a crystal wine glass. Dark red wine spilled across the white linen tablecloth, pooling like blood. He reached with both hands, desperate to snatch the bank statements and the termination letter away from Marcus's side of the table. Marcus did not even blink. With terrifying speed and absolute precision, his hand shot out. He caught Spencer by the wrist mid-air. With a swift, fluid martial motion, Marcus twisted Spencer's arm downward and slammed his wrist flat against the solid mahogany table. Spencer let out a sharp yell of pain. He tried to pull his arm back, his shoes slipping against the floor, but Marcus pinned his wrist with effortless, unbreakable strength. Marcus sat perfectly still, his posture completely relaxed, while Spencer struggled and cursed, thoroughly humiliated by his inability to break free. "Do not touch my property," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that demanded absolute obedience. Sweat poured down Spencer's red face. He stopped struggling and looked at my father, his eyes wide with raw panic. "Thomas, do something! He is assaulting me in your house. Call the police!" The entire room turned to the patriarch. My father had been sitting completely still, his eyes fixed on the spilled red wine soaking into his expensive tablecloth. Slowly, methodically, he stood up. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck were bulging against his collar. He looked like a man on the absolute edge of violent eruption. But as my father raised his head, his furious, burning gaze completely bypassed Spencer. He was not looking at the thief who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his retirement. He was looking directly at me. The absolute silence in the dining room was deafening. Spencer's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The smug, superior finance expert was gone, replaced by a terrified man stripped of his armor. Marcus did not pause to let the reality settle. He turned the page of the dossier, his movements slow and deliberate, treating my parents' dining room table like a deposition room. Let us examine this generational wealth you claim to be building, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Page 4, Spencer. A wire transfer of $85,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Page 5. A subsequent transfer of that exact amount to a cryptocurrency exchange, known for high-risk altcoin trading. And page 6. The complete liquidation of that account, following a margin call just 3 days later. My mother let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest. Marcus, stop it, she pleaded, her voice trembling with denial. Spencer is a professional. He manages hedge funds. You are misreading the documents. I am reading his personal bank statements, Brenda, Marcus corrected smoothly, not looking up from the pages. The same bank statements that show $50,000 deposited directly from your joint checking account on the 12th of last month. The very next morning, $48,000 was transferred to an online sports betting syndicate based out of Malta. He is not managing hedge funds. He is managing a catastrophic gambling addiction. Chloe grabbed Spencer's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. Spencer, what is he talking about? Tell them he is lying. Tell them about the trust fund for the babies. Spencer yanked his arm away, refusing to look at his wife. He was sweating profusely now, large drops gathering at his hairline. He glared at Marcus, his face twisting into a mask of pure desperation. You hacked my accounts. This is inadmissible. I will have you thrown in federal prison for cybercrimes. These were provided by the bankruptcy trustee, Spencer, Marcus replied, dealing the final blow with surgical precision. You filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 2 weeks ago. You have no assets. You have no trust fund. You took $300,000 from Thomas and Brenda, money they thought was paying for Chloe's medical treatments, and you used it to run a pathetic, desperate Ponzi scheme to cover your gambling debts. Marcus flipped another page. Here is a transfer to a luxury car dealership, a lease payment for the Porsche you parked in the driveway today, paid for directly by a withdrawal from Thomas's retirement account. I watched my parents. For my entire life, they had preached about responsibility, accountability, and the importance of legacy. They had held Spencer up as the gold standard of success. I could not hold back the bitter truth any longer. Look at yourselves, I said, my voice ringing clear and hard across the table. Look at the man you put on a pedestal. You worship him. You bowed down to him because he is a white guy in a tailored suit who uses words like diversification and asset allocation. You wanted so desperately to have a country club son-in-law that you completely ignored reality. You paraded him around the congregation. You let him give financial seminars to the church elders. My father's head snapped toward me, his eyes blazing, but I refused to back down. You let him sit at this table every Sunday and disrespect Marcus. I continued, pointing directly at my husband. Marcus is a partner at a top-tier law firm. He built his career from the ground up. He treats me with absolute respect. He treats you with respect. But because he is a quiet black man who does not brag about his portfolio, you treated him like a second-class citizen. You let Spencer belittle his career. You smiled and nodded while Spencer made jokes about Marcus being a glorified paralegal. My mother covered her face with her hands, shaking her head side to side. Maya, please stop. No, I will not stop. I fired back. You drained your retirement accounts for him. You handed over your life savings because you were so blinded by your own internalized prejudice and your obsession with status. You thought proximity to his whiteness and his fake wealth elevated you in the church community. You sacrificed your own security, and you used my miscarriages as the excuse to do it. Chloe let out a high, piercing wail. My house, Spencer, the down payment for the new house in Buckhead. Where is it? There is no house, Chloe, Marcus stated flatly. Your current lease is 3 months in arrears. You are facing eviction by the end of the week. Spencer finally snapped. The cornered animal instinct took over. He let out a furious roar and lunged across the dining room table, his arms outstretched, hands clawing frantically to snatch the black dossier away from Marcus. Plates crashed together. Crystal glasses shattered against the hardwood floor. The roast beef platter tipped over, spilling dark gravy across the lace tablecloth. Before Spencer's fingers could even brush the edge of the folder, Marcus moved. He did not shout. He did not stand up. With terrifying calculated speed, Marcus shot his left hand forward, catching Spencer by the wrist mid-lunge. In one fluid, seamless motion, Marcus twisted Spencer's arm downward and slammed his wrist flat against the solid mahogany table. The impact echoed like a gunshot. Spencer cried out, his knees buckling slightly as the awkward angle forced him to bow over the ruined dinner. He tried to yank his arm back, his tailored suit jacket straining against his shoulders, but Marcus held him pinned with a grip that looked effortless, but was clearly unbreakable. Marcus did not even break a sweat. He simply adjusted his glasses with his free hand, staring blankly at the man writhing across the table. Spencer, breathing heavily, his face completely drained of color, looked desperately toward the head of the table. He looked to the man who had always protected him. He looked to my father for salvation. "Thomas, get him off me," Spencer choked out. "Call the police, he is assaulting me." I turned my gaze to my father, expecting him to leap to Spencer's defense, expecting him to demand Marcus leave his house. Thomas slowly stood up from his heavy carved chair. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck stood out like thick cords. He was practically vibrating with absolute unhinged rage. But as my father raised his head, his furious, burning eyes completely bypassed Spencer. He was not looking at the thief who had stolen his retirement savings. He was not looking at the man currently pinned to his dining table. He was looking directly at me. My father's eyes burned into mine with a hatred so pure it momentarily took my breath away. He did not look at the man who had just swindled him out of his life savings. He did not look at the daughter who had forged medical records and mocked my dead children. His wrath was reserved entirely for me, the person who had dared to expose the rot underneath his perfect foundation. He slammed his heavy fist down on the table for a second time. The remaining crystal glasses shuddered. "You listen to me right now!" Maya, my father bellowed, his voice booming with the exact terrifying cadence he used when preaching from the church pulpit. Spencer made a bad business decision. The market fluctuates. Things happen. But in this house, we protect our family. We do not air our dirty laundry, and we certainly do not humiliate our own flesh and blood at the Sunday dinner table. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of his delusion. A bad business decision. I repeated, my voice rising. "Dad, he embezzled money from his firm. He lied to you about a trust fund. He gambled away $300,000 of your retirement money on overseas sports betting. He is a criminal." "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed, darting a panicked look toward the curtained windows, as if the neighbors were pressing their ears against the glass. My father pointed a thick, trembling finger at my face. "If the congregation finds out about this, my position as head deacon is ruined. Do you understand what that means? The church board is voting on the new community outreach director next month. If a scandal like this leaks out, if anyone hears that my son-in-law lost a fortune in crypto and gambling, my reputation in Atlanta is finished. I will be a laughingstock." The absolute absurdity of his priorities washed over me like a bucket of ice water. He was facing total financial ruin, yet his primary concern was what the church ladies would whisper about him during coffee hour. He cared more about his title as head deacon than he cared about the fact that his golden son-in-law was a fraudulent thief. Spencer, still pinned to the table by Marcus, let out a pathetic groan. "Thomas, please," Spencer begged, his arrogant facade completely dissolved into cowardice. "I can fix this. I just need a bridge loan to cover the margin calls. I can make it all back." My father ignored Spencer's whining and kept his furious gaze locked on me. He straightened his posture, adjusting his suit jacket, transforming back into the commanding patriarch who demanded absolute submission. "You are going to fix this, Maya," my father commanded. I blinked, genuinely confused for a split second. "Fix what? You are going to replace the money," he stated flatly, as if ordering a side dish at a restaurant. "You are going to liquidate that little catering business of yours. I know you have been expanding your kitchen space and buying new equipment. Sell it all. Cash out whatever inventory you have and write Spencer a check for $300,000 by Tuesday morning." The silence in the dining room was so profound, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Even Marcus shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. You want me to sell my business? I said, my voice dangerously soft. You want me to destroy my own company to pay off the gambling debts of the man who stole from you? It is the least you can do, my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. After the stress you just put your pregnant sister through with this horrible stunt, you owe this family. You owe me, my father thundered, stepping closer to my side of the table. Let me remind you of exactly who you are, Maya. When you dropped out of your graduate program because you could not handle the pressure, who was there for you? I was. I co-signed the lease on your first miserable little apartment when you had no credit and no prospects. I put my own name on the line so you would not be out on the street. You owe me your entire start in life. The audacity of his revisionist history was the spark that ignited the final powder keg inside my chest. I felt a hot, blinding rage surge through my veins. I did not drop out of grad school because I could not handle the pressure. I screamed, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I dropped out because my tuition check bounced. And do you know why it bounced, Dad? Because you drained my college fund. You took the money I worked my entire life to save, the money you promised was secure, and you emptied the account. I turned to glare at my sister, who was cowering behind her napkin. You drained my education fund to pay for Chloe's lavish sorority debut. You used my tuition money to buy her a brand new Mercedes, because she claimed she could not possibly drive a used car to a state university. You co-signed my cheap apartment because you felt guilty that you had sacrificed my future to fund her vanity. You do not own my success. You never supported my business. You called it a kitchen hobby and told me I was wasting my life. Chloe burst into fresh, hysterical tears. Mom, make her stop being so mean to me, she wailed, clutching her stomach. The stress is bad for the baby. My father slammed his fist on the table a third time, his face twisting into an ugly, authoritative scowl. He was completely unfazed by the truth. He only cared about control. I will not tolerate this disrespect in my house, my father roared. This is my final word on the matter. You will sell your little kitchen hobby. You will bring a cashier's check for $300,000 to this house by Tuesday morning to cover Spencer's debts. You will do this to protect our family name. If you refuse, if you walk out that door without agreeing to fix this mess, you are dead to this family. You will be cut off, disowned, and completely erased from our lives. He stood tall, puffing out his chest, waiting for the familiar fear to wash over me. He waited for me to crumble, to cry, to beg for his forgiveness and acceptance, just like I had done when I was a desperate 20-year-old girl. I looked at my father's red, angry face. I looked at my mother's spiteful glare. I looked at Chloe's fake tears and Spencer's sweating, pathetic form still trapped under my husband's unyielding grip. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a sound bubbled up from the very bottom of my stomach. I started to laugh. It was not a nervous giggle or a bitter chuckle. It was genuine, deep, uncontrollable laughter. It tore through the tense air of the dining room, loud and bright and completely unhinged. I threw my head back and laughed until my sides physically ached, tears of pure, unadulterated amusement pricking the corners of my eyes. The generational curse was breaking right in front of me, and it was the funniest thing I had ever witnessed. My laughter bounced off the crystal chandelier and echoed through the suffocating stillness of the dining room. It was a rich, full-bodied sound that I had not heard escape my own lips in years. I laughed until my ribs ached, and tears of pure, unadulterated relief streamed down my cheeks. For my entire life I had been terrified of my father's wrath. I had shrunk myself to fit into his narrow, conditional definition of a daughter. But looking at him now, his face contorted in purple rage over a pathetic, gambling-addicted thief, the illusion of his ultimate authority simply evaporated. He was not a king. He was just a hypocrite in a nice suit. "Are you out of your mind?" my father bellowed, taking a menacing step toward me. His hands were balled into tight fists at his sides. "I give you a direct order to save this family from ruin, and you stand there laughing like a hysterical child. You have completely lost your grip on reality, Maya." I slowly caught my breath, wiping a stray tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I took one final deep breath, letting the last remnants of the fearful little girl I used to be exit my body forever. I stood up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back. Marcus, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, smoothly released his iron grip on Spencer's wrist. Spencer immediately scrambled backward, nearly falling out of his chair, cradling his arm against his chest like a wounded child. I ignored him entirely. Without saying a word, I stepped away from the ruined dinner table and walked over to the antique credenza, resting beneath the massive 70-inch flat-screen television my father used to watch his Sunday golf tournaments. I picked up the sleek silver remote. "What are you doing?" my mother demanded, her voice shrill with confusion. "Thomas is talking to you. Look at him when he is speaking." I pressed the power button. The massive screen flickered to life, casting a bright, cool blue glow across the dining room, illuminating the spilled red wine and shattered crystal on the floor. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket, swiped down to open the control center, and tapped the screen mirroring icon. A soft digital chime echoed through the room as my phone synced directly to the television. I turned my back to the screen, facing my family, as my phone's display filled the 70-inch monitor behind me. I opened my web browser and refreshed the tab I had been saving for exactly this moment. "You called my business a little kitchen hobby." "Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm, carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who held all the cards. "You told me to liquidate my inventory to pay for the mistakes of a man who looks down on me. You assumed, just like you always do, that I am failing because I am not following your exact blueprint." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the massive screen. "Take a look at my kitchen hobby." The web page loaded in high definition, dominating the entire wall. It was today's front page of Forbes.com. The banner at the top was unmistakable, but it was the center of the screen that sucked all the air out of the room. There, displayed in brilliant professional clarity, was a massive portrait of me. I was wearing a sharp, tailored emerald pantsuit, standing confidently, with my arms crossed in front of a sprawling, state-of-the-art production facility. I looked powerful, radiant, and entirely untouchable. Directly beneath my photograph was a bold black headline that stretched across the entire width of the television. It read, "African American female founder sells organic baby food empire for $50 million." The dining room went dead silent. It was a silence so heavy, so absolute, that it felt like the atmospheric pressure in the house had suddenly dropped. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a sledgehammer striking an anvil. Chloe's theatrical heaving sobs stopped instantly. The sound simply cut off in her throat as if someone had flipped a switch. She stared at the 70-inch screen, her mouth hanging open in a very unladylike gape. The golden child, the sister who had faked a pregnancy and stolen my medical records just to keep the spotlight on herself, was now staring at an achievement she could not even begin to comprehend. Spencer's jaw actually dropped. The arrogant, dismissive wealth manager who had mocked my husband and sneered at my catering business was paralyzed. His eyes darted frantically across the screen, reading the headline over and over again, as if trying to find a typo. The math was breaking his brain. He had destroyed his career and his dignity for a few $100,000 in gambling debts. I had just sold my company for $50 million. The sheer, overwhelming scale of my success completely eradicated his fragile male ego. But it was my mother who reacted the most viscerally. Brenda stood up slowly from her chair, acting as if she were caught in a trance. She took 2 trembling steps toward the television. Her eyes were bulging out of her head, practically vibrating as she physically tracked the digits on the screen. 5, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, $50 million. I could literally see her materialistic, status-obsessed brain short-circuiting. The daughter she had constantly belittled, the daughter she had deemed a failure for not marrying a white finance bro, was suddenly possessing more liquid wealth than everyone else in the room combined. My father stood frozen. The purple rage had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking ashen, old, and incredibly small. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at the Forbes headline, then down at his hands, and then back up at the screen. The patriarch who had just threatened to disown me for not writing a $300,000 check was suddenly staring at a $50 million reality check. I looked directly at my father, locking my eyes with his shocked, defeated gaze. My little kitchen hobby just got acquired by a global conglomerate. I said, my voice steady and cold, ringing with absolute finality. I don't need to sell anything to cover your golden boy's debts, but it gets better. I watched the exact moment my mother's brain rewired itself. The venom that had been dripping from her fangs only seconds ago completely evaporated. She blinked, staring at the $50 million figure on the massive screen, and a deeply unsettling syrupy smile stretched across her face. It was a smile I had never seen directed at me in my 34 years of life. "Oh, praise the Lord!" my mother gasped, clapping her hands together and pressing them against her chest in a gesture of profound manufactured piety. She took a step toward me, her eyes shining with a sudden ravenous hunger. "Baby girl, my sweet Maya, Mommy always knew you were destined for greatness." I physically recoiled. The pet name made my skin crawl. This was the same woman who not 10 minutes prior had watched my father threaten to disown me. The same woman who had demanded I liquidate my entire life to bail out her white knight's son-in-law. Now confronted with a fortune that dwarfed anything Spencer could ever dream of managing, she was trying to rewrite history in real time. 50 million! She breathed, the words rolling off her tongue like a prayer. She turned to my father, her voice trembling with breathless excitement. "Thomas, do you see this? The Lord provides, Maya. This is an absolute miracle. You can just buy Spencer out of his little debt right now. It is pocket change to you. And with that kind of capital, we can finally upgrade the church's community center. We will put your name right on the building, the Maya Adams Community Annex. The congregation will be absolutely floored." The sheer unabashed audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. She was already spending my money. She was already calculating how my success, the success I built alone, the success she mocked as a kitchen hobby, could be leveraged to fix her immediate problems and buy her social capital at her church. I looked at her, utterly repulsed. There was no apology for the years of emotional abuse, no remorse for funding Chloe's lies, just instant, unadulterated greed. The sound of Chloe clearing her throat dragged my attention back to the table. My sister had miraculously recovered from her hysterical breakdown. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, her posture straightening as the gears in her head clicked into place. The realization that her sister was suddenly ultra-wealthy completely overrode her shame about faking a pregnancy. "Well," Chloe began, her voice taking on that familiar whining tone of entitlement she had perfected over a lifetime. "Since you have been hiding all of this money while I have been suffering, I think it is only fair that we come to an arrangement." I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the depth of her delusion. "An arrangement?" I asked softly. "You humiliated me tonight," Chloe stated, lifting her chin defiantly. "You brought this private investigator stuff into my home. You caused me severe emotional distress. And you clearly have more money than you know what to do with. I think $1 million is a perfectly reasonable compensation for the trauma you just put me through. Plus, it will help Spencer and me get back on our feet after his unfair termination." Spencer, still rubbing his wrist where Marcus had pinned him, nodded vigorously. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by the desperate, manic gleam of a gambling addict seeing a fresh pile of chips. He leaned forward, attempting to sound authoritative despite his hunched posture. "She is right, Maya," Spencer rasped, licking his dry lips. "You keep this in the family. You write the check, we handle the Vanguard situation quietly, and nobody has to know about your little display of disrespect tonight. It is a win for everyone. We can even offer you equity in my next venture. I have some major plays lined up, I just need a silent partner for the initial seed capital." I looked at the three of them. My mother calculating church donations to boost her own ego. My sister demanding $1 million trauma tax for being caught in a lie. My brother-in-law pitching me a non-existent business venture mere minutes after being exposed as a fraud. They were parasites feeding off whatever host offered the most resources. They did not see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a bank vault, and they felt entirely entitled to the combination. "You are all completely out of your minds," I said, my voice slicing through their greedy delusions. "You will not see a single cent of my money. Not for a community center. Not for an extortion fee. And certainly not to bail out a man who stole from his own firm to gamble online. You are getting absolutely nothing." My father, who had remained frozen since the Forbes article appeared on the screen, finally snapped out of his shock. His face darkened, the purple rage returning, but this time it was mixed with a desperate underlying panic. He slammed his hand against the back of his dining chair, his knuckles turning white. "You will do as you are told, Maya," my father roared, his voice cracking with intensity. "You will pay this debt tonight. You will write that check right now. This is not up for debate." The absolute desperation in my father's voice was jarring. It was too intense, too frantic even for a man trying to save face. He was sweating now, his chest heaving as he stared at me with wild, terrified eyes. And that was when Marcus spoke. Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the dining room corner, casually adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He walked slowly back to the table, picking up the black dossier he had dropped earlier. He did not look at Brenda, Chloe, or Spencer. His sharp, intelligent eyes locked directly onto my father. "You don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation," Thomas Marcus said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that instantly silenced the room. "You are screaming at your daughter to liquidate her assets to cover a $300,000 hole. But you are a wealthy man. You own properties. You have a massive pension. You sit on the board of several local charities. You have influence." Marcus leaned forward, planting both hands flat on the mahogany table, closing the distance between himself and my father. His gaze was unrelenting, stripping away every layer of my father's self-righteous facade. "So tell me." Thomas Marcus continued, his words slow, measured, and dripping with suspicion. "Why exactly are you so desperate to cover up Spencer's $300,000 loss tonight? Why can you not just absorb the loss yourself? Why are you demanding cash immediately under the table with no paper trail?" My father's jaw clamped shut. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He looked at Marcus, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen him display in my entire life. He opened his mouth, but he refused to answer. Marcus did not wait for my father to find his voice. My husband moved with the calm, methodical precision of a predator who had successfully cornered its prey. He flipped past the initial pages of the dossier, the ones detailing Spencer's catastrophic gambling losses, and extracted a second, thinner manila folder tucked into the back pocket. "Since you seem to have misplaced your voice, Thomas, I will gladly explain the timeline for the rest of the table," Marcus said. His tone was surgical, entirely stripped of emotion. He withdrew a stack of highlighted financial documents and tossed them onto the center of the mahogany table, right on top of the shattered crystal and spilled red wine. "These are wire transfer records from the past 90 days. My father stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. The sweat on his forehead was now visible, beading and dripping down his flushed cheeks. "You told Maya that Spencer gambled away your retirement savings," Marcus continued, pacing slowly behind my chair. "That was a lie. Your retirement accounts have been empty for nearly 2 years, drained to maintain this massive estate and Brenda's country club memberships. There was no $300,000 of personal wealth left to lose." Brenda let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at her husband in absolute horror, her meticulously crafted reality beginning to fracture. "So where did the money come from?" Marcus asked, rhetorically tapping the top document. "It came from an account ending in 4409, an account that belongs to the First Baptist Church of Atlanta, specifically the Community Building Fund." The silence that followed was suffocating. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hung in the air, thick and toxic. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "As head deacon, you have sole signatory authority over that specific overflow account. You authorized 3 separate wire transfers to Spencer's offshore holding company. Spencer promised you a guaranteed massive return on a high-risk crypto venture. You plan to double the church's money, secretly return the principal, and pocket the profits to save yourself from your own looming bankruptcy." I stared at my father, a profound, icy horror washing over me. The hypocrisy was so blinding it made my head spin. This was the man who stood at the pulpit every single Sunday. This was the man who boomed Bible verses about integrity, hard work, and the sins of greed. He had judged me for dropping out of grad school when he was the one who stole my tuition. He had sneered at my catering business, calling it a hobby, while he was secretly raiding the collection plates of working-class families. I was not just a terrible father, he was a common calculating thief. But Spencer did not double the money, Marcus stated, delivering the final crushing blow. He lost every single penny on leveraged sports bets within 48 hours. And the annual independent church audit is scheduled for next Wednesday. If that $300,000 is not sitting in account 4409 by Tuesday morning, the auditors will flag the embezzlement. The board will be notified. The police will be called. Thomas, tell me this is a lie, my mother shrieked. Her voice was shrill, completely devoid of the fake syrupy sweetness she had displayed just moments before. Tell me you did not steal from our church. The congregation will crucify us. My father could not look at her. He could not look at Marcus. He finally turned his bloodshot, terrified eyes toward me. The commanding authoritarian patriarch shattered into a million pathetic pieces right in front of my eyes. His shoulders slumped, his chest caved in, and he let out a wretched whimpering sound. He lunged across the table, his hands grasping frantically at the empty air toward me. Maya, you have to save me, my father begged. His voice was entirely unrecognizable. It was high, reedy, and vibrating with absolute panic. You have $50 million. 300,000 is nothing to you now. It is a rounding error. You can write a check tonight and make this whole nightmare go away. No one ever has to know. I will step down from the deacon board next year. I will quietly retire. Just please, baby girl, you have to fix this. I looked at his outstretched hands. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity. No residual familial loyalty. Just a cold, clinical disgust. You want me to fix it? I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Yes, he cried, tears now actively streaming down his wrinkled face. I am your father, I gave you life, the Lord commands you to honor me. You are a wealthy woman now, Maya. You have been blessed. You must use those blessings to protect your blood. If you don't write this check, I will go to federal prison. I will die behind bars. You cannot let your own father go to jail. I was actually trying to use religion against me. He was attempting to weaponize the very faith he had just exploited to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. He expected me to shield him from the consequences of his own criminal greed simply because we shared DNA. He had allowed me to struggle, he had drained my college fund to buy Chloe a luxury car, and he had demanded I destroy my own business to save his golden son-in-law. Now, facing a federal indictment, he demanded my salvation. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my emerald pantsuit. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man who had terrorized me for decades. I felt incredibly tall. Honor is earned, I said. My voice was quiet, yet it carried the force of an absolute decree. You stopped being my father the day you stole my future to fund your favorite daughter's vanity. You have spent my entire life trying to break me down, and now that I have built an empire without you, you want me to buy your freedom. I leaned over the table, bringing my face inches from his. I could smell the stale wine and sour panic radiating from his skin. And I'm not writing a dime, I whispered coldly. My father gasped, clutching his chest, as if I had driven a blade right through his ribs. He fell back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing in silent, hyperventilating shock. Chloe began to wail again, a high-pitched sound of pure terror as the reality of her impending poverty set in. Spencer remained frozen, staring blankly at the wall. I turned away from the table, linking my arm through Marcus's. We had stayed long enough. We had delivered the truth, and we were leaving them to drown in it. I stopped at the edge of the dining room archway and looked back at my father one last time. Besides, I said, a razor-sharp smile touching the corners of my lips, you have a bigger problem than the church audit. You have nowhere to live. My father let out a harsh barking laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping against pavement. He pushed himself upright, planting his hands on his hips, desperately trying to summon the imposing figure he had cast over my childhood. His face flushed a deep, ugly red as he jutted his chin forward. You really are making a fool of yourself, Maya. My father sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. You think you can waltz in here with your new money and frighten me? I have lived in this city for 30 years. I am a pillar of this community. And I own this house free and clear. The deed is sitting in my fireproof safe upstairs. Don't you dare try to threaten me in my own dining room. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying insect. You owned this house free and clear 5 years ago, I corrected him, keeping my tone perfectly level. But then Chloe decided she could not possibly endure a modest wedding. Spencer needed a $500,000 venture capital injection for that ridiculous sports betting algorithm he claimed was going to revolutionize the industry. And Mom just absolutely had to remodel the entire East Wing to impress the country club ladies. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. Her eyes darted toward my father, a flicker of genuine uncertainty breaking through her greedy facade. You could not afford any of it. I continued, my words landing like hammer blows in the quiet room. Your consulting firm was already hemorrhaging clients and your retirement was gone. So exactly 2 years and 4 months ago, you walked into First National Bank and you leveraged the only real asset you had left. You took out a massive second mortgage on this estate. You drained every ounce of equity out of the walls around us to fund a lifestyle you had no business living. Lies, my father spat, though his voice wavered slightly. He refused to look at my mother. You are spinning ridiculous lies to justify your own selfishness. I ignored his pathetic denial. You took the money, Thomas, and you threw it into a burning pit. Spencer's app crashed before it even launched. Chloe blew through her wedding budget and demanded an additional 100,000 for her European honeymoon. And you kept paying the minimum balance on the mortgage until 6 months ago. The color began to rapidly drain from my mother's face. She grabbed my father's sleeve, her manicured fingernails digging into the fabric of his suit jacket. Thomas, Brenda gasped, her voice trembling. Thomas, what is she talking about? What second mortgage? You told me the remodel was paid for with a company bonus. Tell me she is lying right now. My father tried to shake off her grip, his eyes darting frantically toward the front windows as if he expected the police to be waiting on the lawn. Brenda, stop it, he hissed through gritted teeth. Do not listen to her. She is just trying to cause a scene. You have defaulted on the last 6 payments, I stated, cutting through their bickering. You have not sent the bank a single dime since January. You have been intercepting the mail, hiding the default notices in your private post office box downtown. You thought you could stall them. You thought you could embezzle the church building fund, give it to Spencer to multiply at the casino, pay off the mortgage arrears, and slide the rest back into the church accounts before anyone noticed. It was a desperate, stupid plan constructed by a desperate, stupid man. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother let go of his sleeve and took a staggering step backward. She looked around the opulent dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier, the silk drapes, the expensive crown molding, as if seeing them for the last time. Her entire identity, her entire sense of superiority over her peers was tied to the ownership of this massive suburban fortress. The realization that she was standing inside a repossessed illusion was visibly breaking her mind. Chloe clutched her stomach, looking wildly between our parents. Daddy, she whined, her voice pitching into a panicked squeal. Daddy, please tell me we aren't losing the house. Spencer and I are supposed to move into the guest house next month. We don't have anywhere else to go. My father held up both hands, his palms facing outward in a desperate gesture of appeasement. He was sweating profusely now, his tailored shirt clinging to his chest. Everyone just calm down, my father shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. Yes, fine, I took out a loan against the property, but it is under control. I spoke to the bank manager just last week. We have a long-standing relationship. I explained the temporary liquidity issue, and he gave me a 90-day extension to figure it out. The market is going to rebound. We just need a little more time. They are not foreclosing on us. He looked around the room, trying to project authority, trying to force us to believe the delusion he was actively clinging to. He puffed out his chest, pointing a trembling finger at me. You see, Maya, he demanded, his voice laced with frantic, unearned pride. The bank is working with me. I am a respected man. They gave me an extension. You don't know everything. A deep, rich chuckle broke the tension. We all turned to look at Marcus. My husband was standing near the doorway, leaning casually against the arched doorframe with his arms crossed over his chest. He was smiling, but it was not a kind smile. It was the terrifying, bloodless smile of a corporate shark who had just smelled a fresh kill in the water. Marcus slowly shook his head, his dark eyes locked onto my father with an expression of pure predatory amusement. "The bank didn't give you an extension," Thomas Marcus said, his voice smooth and deadly quiet. "Banks do not like messy public relations. They do not like the optics of sending sheriffs to evict prominent church deacons and their crying wives from affluent neighborhoods. It creates bad press. It lowers the neighborhood property values." My father swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "What are you talking about?" he croaked. "They did not extend your grace period." Marcus continued, pushing off the doorframe and taking slow, deliberate steps back toward the dining table. "They decided you were a toxic liability. So exactly 2 weeks ago, your bank packaged your distressed debt and sold it off for pennies on the dollar. They washed their hands of you entirely." "Sold it," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sold it to who?" "To a private holding company," Marcus explained, coming to stand right beside me. "A very aggressive, very well-funded private holding company that specializes in acquiring distressed luxury real estate. They do not care about your long-standing relationship with the local branch manager. They do not care about your position at the church. They do not care about bad press. They only care about the asset." My father looked like he was going to be physically sick. He grabbed the back of his chair to keep himself from collapsing. "You're lying," he gasped. "You couldn't possibly know that." Marcus's smile widened, flashing bright white teeth against his dark skin. "I know it because it is my job to know it, Thomas. And I know for a fact that this specific holding company does not grant extensions. They do not negotiate, they execute. And they are executing the foreclosure tonight." "Who bought the debt?" My father screamed, his voice cracking with a manic cornered energy that echoed violently off the vaulted ceilings. He slammed both of his hands flat against the mahogany dining table, rattling the remaining intact crystal glasses and sending a fresh wave of spilled red wine dripping onto the expensive Persian rug below. "I will sue them. I will take them to the highest court in this state. I will take them to the Supreme Court if I have to. No anonymous, faceless corporate entity is going to steal my home out from under me." My father was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit jacket. His face had turned a horrifying shade of magenta, and a thick blue vein pulsed visibly at his temple. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Marcus. "I am Thomas Adams," my father bellowed, trying desperately to summon the imposing, terrifying authority he had used to control this family for decades. "I am a respected man in this city. I have a team of vicious lawyers on retainer who will bury this holding company in so much tedious, expensive litigation they will beg me to settle. They picked the wrong man to mess with." He stood tall, puffing out his chest, looking frantically between Marcus and me. He expected us to flinch. He expected his bluster to intimidate us, just as it had always intimidated my mother and sister. But the power dynamic in this dining room had fundamentally and permanently shifted. His empty threats sounded like the pathetic, desperate flailing of a drowning man who had just realized there was no rescue boat coming. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I maintained a cold, detached expression as I reached down to the floor and picked up my designer leather handbag. The dining room was dead silent save for my father's ragged, panicked breathing. I slowly unclasped the brass hardware of my purse. I reached my hand inside, bypassing my wallet and my phone, until my fingers wrapped around a large, cold bundle of metal. I pulled a heavy ring of keys out of my bag. There were at least 20 keys on the ring, jingling sharply and aggressively in the quiet room. I locked eyes with my father. With a swift, deliberate flick of my wrist, I tossed the massive bundle of metal directly across the table. The heavy keys sailed through the air and struck my father's fine bone china dinner plate with a sharp, resonant crack. The force of the impact chipped the ornate gold rim of the plate, sending the keys sliding directly into his half-eaten serving of mashed potatoes. "I did," I said, my voice completely stripped of any warmth or emotion. My father jumped back, staring down at the keys resting in his ruined dinner as if they were a live grenade. His brain was completely unable to process the physical object in front of him. He looked up at me, his mouth hanging open. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice entirely devoid of its previous thunder. "I am the sole owner of the private holding company that bought your distressed debt." I explained, leaning forward slightly to ensure every single syllable landed with maximum devastating impact. When your bank realized you were embezzling church funds and defaulting on your second mortgage, they decided you were a highly toxic asset. My acquisitions team swooped in immediately. We purchased the mortgage for absolute pennies on the dollar because your financial profile is completely radioactive. I own the debt, Thomas, which means I own the deed to this estate. I am your landlord. My mother let out a strangled, breathless wheeze, but I kept my eyes locked entirely on the man who had spent my entire life telling me I would amount to nothing. And I do not grant extensions. I continued, my voice echoing with icy, calculated finality. Your eviction notice has already been filed with the county clerk. The local sheriff has the finalized paperwork in his hands right now. You have exactly 30 days to pack up whatever cheap, heavily financed belongings you have left and vacate my property. If you are not gone by the first of the month, I will have law enforcement physically remove you from the premises. No, Brenda shrieked. It was a guttural, horrifying sound that tore from the very bottom of her lungs. My mother clutched her chest with both hands, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the fabric of her expensive silk blouse. She stumbled backward, hitting the dining room wall, her face contorted in absolute, unadulterated agony. My house, Brenda wailed, hyperventilating as she looked frantically around the room. My beautiful house. You cannot do this to me, Maya. My friends at the country club will find out. The ladies at the church auxiliary will see the moving trucks. I will be a laughingstock. I will be ruined. She slid down the expensive wallpaper, hitting the hardwood floor and sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The reality of losing her status, her ultimate symbol of suburban superiority, completely broke her fragile materialistic mind. But Brenda's pathetic breakdown was absolutely nothing compared to Chloe. My sister let out a blood-curdling scream that sounded like a feral animal caught in a trap. Her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unhinged rage. My life is ruined, Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs. She grabbed her dinner plate and hurled it violently across the room. The expensive china shattered against the antique wooden credenza, sending jagged shards of porcelain flying in every direction. Chloe did not stop there. She grabbed her crystal wineglass and smashed it directly onto the floor. You jealous, vindictive monster! Chloe roared at me, picking up a heavy silver serving spoon and throwing it wildly at the wall, leaving a deep dent in the plaster. I was supposed to move into the guest house. I am having a baby. You are making a pregnant woman homeless on purpose. Chloe grabbed the heavy crystal floral centerpiece from the middle of the table, water and flower petals spilling everywhere, clearly intending to throw it straight through the front window. She was having a total, violent, destructive meltdown, actively demolishing the very house she was crying over losing. Amidst the absolute chaos of Brenda's hyperventilating sobs on the floor, Chloe's violent demolition of the dining room, and my father standing frozen in catatonic shock over his chipped dinner plate, I noticed quiet movement out of the corner of my eye. Spencer, the arrogant, condescending finance bro who had just been exposed for embezzling church funds to cover his reckless gambling addiction, was slowly and silently inching his way backward. He looked at the screaming women and his ruined father-in-law, realizing with terrifying clarity that the family ship was rapidly sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Spencer had absolutely no intention of drowning with them. While his wife shrieked and threw silverware across the room, Spencer turned his body and quietly attempted to sneak out the back door leading to the kitchen. He was abandoning his supposedly pregnant, hysterical wife to save his own skin. He took 2 stealthy steps toward the exit, his hand reaching out desperately for the brass door handle. Before his fingers could even graze the metal, a heavy hand slammed flat against the wooden door, slamming it shut with a resounding heavy thud. Spencer jumped backward, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. Marcus stood directly in front of the door, completely blocking Spencer's only avenue of escape. My husband towered over the cowardly man, his broad shoulders effortlessly filling the entire doorframe. Marcus smiled down at him, flashing the terrifying, ruthless smile of a corporate shark who was about to devour his prey whole. Where are you going, Spencer? Marcus asked, his deep voice slicing effortlessly through the chaotic sound of Chloe smashing another glass. We haven't even talked about your commercial lease yet. Spencer stumbled backward, his hand snatching back from the brass doorknob, as if the metal had severely burned him. He spun around his chest, heaving, his eyes darting frantically between Marcus's immovable frame and my cold, unyielding expression. For a split second, pure terror flashed across his face. But Spencer had spent his entire life coasting on unearned confidence and arrogant entitlement. He quickly puffed out his chest, squaring his shoulders in a desperate, pathetic attempt to use his physical height to intimidate my husband. "Move out of my way," Spencer demanded. His voice was loud, but it lacked the heavy bass of true authority. He yanked his phone from his pocket, holding it up like a weapon. "This is kidnapping. This is false imprisonment. You cannot legally hold me in this house. I will call the police right now and have you both arrested for extortion and harassment." Marcus did not flinch. He did not move a single muscle. He just stared down at Spencer with a look of profound clinical boredom. "You really think you can touch me?" Spencer spat violently, adjusting his silk tie in a frantic effort to regain his composure. "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I am not some small-town nobody you can bully. My office is right in the center of the financial district. I manage portfolios for the most powerful families in this entire state. I play golf with corporate judges. I dine with state senators. I have clients who could crush your little holding company before breakfast. If you do not let me walk out of that door this second, I will unleash a team of lawyers that will bury you both in litigation until you are bankrupt." Marcus threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, rumbling sound that completely filled the dining room. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of absolute predatory mockery. The sound visibly rattled Spencer, causing him to take another shaky step backward. "You rent Suite 402 in the Apex building," Marcus said, his tone conversational, entirely dismissive of Spencer's ridiculous threats. "It is a very prestigious address. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Imported Italian marble in the lobby. It certainly looks fantastic on a glossy business card." "It is a premier commercial space," Spencer shot back, though his voice wavered slightly. "It is," Marcus agreed smoothly. "What you failed to realize, Spencer, is that the Apex building was quietly sold in a private off-market transaction exactly 3 months ago. The new ownership group is a subsidiary LLC." Marcus gestured gracefully toward me. "An LLC that is wholly owned and operated by my wife. Maya is your landlord." Spencer's mouth opened, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, his brain violently struggling to process the impossible reality of the situation. "And as your landlord, I decided to review your accounts," I said, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my husband. "Your firm is exactly 60 days past due on rent. Under the strict default clause in your commercial lease, which you clearly signed without reading thoroughly, the landlord has the right to take immediate possession of the premises after 45 days of non-payment. Your electronic keycard was deactivated this morning. The physical locks on Suite 402 were changed exactly an hour ago. You no longer have an office." Spencer shook his head rapidly, his carefully styled hair falling into his eyes. "No, no, you can't legally do that. I have proprietary equipment in there. I have sensitive client files in those cabinets. I will sue you for illegal lockout." "Do not worry about your client files, Spencer," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. "We took incredibly good care of them." Spencer froze. The remaining color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, chalky white. "When we audited your office, we noticed a massive, glaring discrepancy between the funds your clients entrusted to you and the actual balance of your offshore holding accounts." I explained, delivering the information with surgical precision. "It turns out using client capital to cover massive personal sports gambling debts and failing cryptocurrency ventures is highly illegal. So to fulfill our ethical and legal obligations as the property owners, we compiled a complete unredacted dossier." "What did you do?" Spencer gasped, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. "We compiled a dossier containing every single one of your fraudulent wire transfers, your hidden offshore accounts, and your staggering casino losses," Marcus stated. "And we mailed that dossier via certified overnight delivery to every single powerful client on your roster. They received the packages this morning. We also sent comprehensive copies to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the local FBI field office. Spencer's phone slipped from his sweaty fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, the expensive screen splintering into a spiderweb of shattered glass. The arrogant, untouchable finance executive vanished completely. The reality of his situation crashed down on his head with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. He was not just broke. He was not just evicted. He was facing decades in federal prison for defrauding investors. His entire life was officially over. His knees buckled. Spencer dropped straight down to the floor, landing heavily on the ruined Persian rug. He curled his arms tightly around his stomach, gasping frantically for air. A harsh, wet wheezing sound tore from his throat. He was having a massive, full-blown panic attack. He clawed violently at the collar of his expensive dress shirt, tearing off his silk tie as he struggled to pull oxygen into his hyperventilating lungs. Chloe stared down at him in absolute unmasked disgust. The man she had endlessly flaunted, the man she had weaponized to belittle my catering business for years, was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating puddle on her parents' dining room floor. She expected a knight in shining armor to protect her lifestyle. Instead, she was looking at a convicted felon. "Spencer, get up!" Chloe shrieked, kicking him sharply in the thigh with the pointed toe of her designer heel. "Stop crying. Call your lawyers. Call your father. Do something like a man. You have to fix this right now." Spencer just sobbed harder, rocking back and forth on the floor, completely broken. He did not even look up at her. He was entirely consumed by his own terror. Chloe stared at the pathetic heap on the floor. Her eyes widened as the devastating truth finally pierced through her lifelong delusion. There was no church money coming to save them. There was no guest house for her to move into. There was no wealthy, powerful husband to shield her from the real world. Her meal ticket had expired. Her golden parachute was engulfed in flames. She was entirely bankrupt, married to a criminal, and completely at my mercy. She slowly lifted her head, turning her gaze away from Spencer and locking her eyes directly onto me. Her face contorted into a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Every single ounce of her terror, panic, and despair instantly hardened into a vicious, toxic rage, directed entirely at the sister who had just dismantled her entire reality. Chloe marched toward me, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Marcus stepped forward to intercept her, putting himself between us, but I held up my hand, stopping him. I wanted to look her in the eye. I wanted to see her break. "You barren, vindictive bitch!" Chloe snarled, her voice a guttural, venomous hiss that echoed wildly through the ruined dining room. She pointed a trembling, manic finger directly at my stomach. "You planned all of this. You destroyed our family because you have always been jealous of me, because I am carrying a child, and your body is a broken, useless wasteland. I hope you miscarry those twins just like the others." The silence that crashed down on the dining room was heavy enough to crack the foundation of the house. The echoes of Chloe's horrific curse hung in the air, a toxic cloud that poisoned every breath I took. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locked on my sister's contorted, manic face. I waited. I waited for my father, the esteemed church deacon, to slam his hand on the table and reprimand his youngest daughter for wishing death upon his unborn grandchildren. I waited for my mother to gasp in horror, to rush forward and scold Chloe for crossing a line so vile and unforgivable that it defied human decency. I waited for just a single shred of parental instinct, a tiny sliver of basic morality, to compel them to defend me. Neither of them moved. My father simply stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his silence serving as a tacit endorsement of Chloe's wrath. Brenda actively looked away, wrapping her arms around her own waist, refusing to meet my gaze. They were not horrified by Chloe's words. They were only horrified that their financial lifeline had been severed. By saying nothing, by doing nothing, they proved their ultimate, unwavering loyalty to the golden child. I was entirely expendable. My unborn children were expendable. Beside me, I felt a violent tremor rip through Marcus. The calculated corporate shark demeanor evaporated, instantly replaced by the lethal protective fury of a father and a husband. His hands balled into tight fists, his knuckles turning white. He took a heavy, dangerous step toward Chloe, his dark eyes blazing with an anger so profound it made the air around us crackle. He was fully prepared to tear this room apart. I reached out and placed my hand flat against his chest. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, furious rhythm. I pressed my palm firmly against his suit jacket, silently demanding he hold his ground. He looked down at me, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked in his cheek, but he stopped. He yielded the floor to me. This was my family. This was my execution to carry out. I turned my attention back to Chloe. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and terror. She expected me to scream. She expected me to cry, to break down and show her the pain she so desperately wanted to inflict. She wanted a reaction to validate her cruelty. I did not give her one. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. My grief over my past losses was a sacred, guarded thing, and I refused to let her tainted hands anywhere near it. You know, Chloe, I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing out with crystal clarity in the ruined dining room. I almost felt bad for you. Despite the years of torment, despite the endless financial drain you placed on these people, I actually considered giving you a soft landing. I thought about setting up a modest trust to ensure my future niece or nephew would never have to experience the poverty you are about to face. Chloe sneered, crossing her arms defensively, though her hands were visibly shaking. Keep your dirty money, she spat. I don't want anything from you. That is highly convenient, I replied smoothly, because that brief moment of sympathy completely evaporated exactly 1 month ago. I reached into the pocket of my emerald pantsuit. I bypassed my phone and withdrew a small, sleek digital audio recorder. The metallic casing caught the light of the chandelier as I held it up between my thumb and forefinger. My father finally looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. Brenda shifted nervously, her eyes darting between the device and my face. Last month you went to your annual sorority reunion at that overpriced country club downtown, I stated, walking slowly around the edge of the shattered porcelain and spilled wine. You had a bit too much to drink, Chloe. You were sloppy. You unlocked your phone, shoved it into your designer clutch, and accidentally pocket-dialed my number. The call went straight to my voicemail. It recorded for 4 uninterrupted minutes. Chloe's sneer faltered. The belligerent rage in her eyes was instantly replaced by a sudden, paralyzing spike of panic. She took a step backward, her heel crunching loudly on a piece of broken glass. I debated deleting it. I continued, my thumb hovering over the play button. I told myself it was just drunken rambling, but then I listened to it, and I realized exactly what kind of monster you truly are. I realized that the cruelty in this family is not just a passive habit. It is an active, celebrated sport. Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I pressed the play button. I had turned the volume to its maximum setting. The small speaker amplified the sound, filling the dining room with the undeniable, crystal-clear recording of a crowded, noisy bar. The clinking of cocktail glasses and the thumping bass of upbeat music echoed through the room. Then came the shrill, unmistakable sound of Chloe's drunken laughter, followed by the voices of her sycophantic friends. "So what is the deal with Maya?" a voice asked on the recording. "Is she ever going to show up to these things?" Chloe's voice cut through the background noise, slurred, arrogant, and dripping with venom. "Oh, please. Maya is entirely useless. She is completely obsessed with her stupid catering company. And guess what? She is a total failure at everything else." Spencer, who was still leaning against the doorframe guarded by Marcus, closed his eyes and buried his face in his hands. He knew what was coming. He knew his wife was a viper and her fangs were about to be exposed to the light. The recording continued. "Yeah, Maya lost another baby," Chloe's drunken voice announced, followed by a harsh, barking laugh. "Good, she's a workaholic loser. She doesn't deserve to be a mother anyway. At least Mom and Dad still treat me like their only real daughter. They agree with me. They know she is a total disappointment." I hit the stop button. The sudden absence of sound was deafening. The horrific, ugly truth of her words hung in the air, a vile confession that could not be retracted, explained away, or blamed on a misunderstanding. Chloe stood frozen, her mouth open in a silent, horrified gasp. All the color had vanished from her face. She looked like a ghost, entirely stripped of her fake suburban perfection. She had been caught. The mask had been ripped off, revealing the rotting, jealous core beneath. My father looked physically ill. He stared at the digital recorder in my hand, then slowly turned his head to look at his favorite daughter. Even he, a man who had justified decades of emotional abuse, seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated evil of her statement. But I was not finished. I lowered the recorder and slowly turned my head, shifting my gaze away from my sister. I locked my eyes directly onto my mother. Brenda was pressing herself flat against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was trembling violently, her hands clutching her pearl necklace, as if it could somehow protect her from the reckoning that had just arrived at her doorstep. "I played that recording a dozen times, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, deadly whisper. I listened to the background noise. I isolated the audio. Because at first I could not believe what I was hearing. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Brenda shook her head frantically, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "Maya, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Please do not do this." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The air between us felt as cold as a frozen lake. "You were in the background of that audio, Mom." I stated, the words landing like fatal strikes against her remaining dignity. "You went to that reunion to drop off her overnight bag. I heard you standing right next to her when she said those horrific things about my dead children. And you did not stop her, you did not scold her, you did not defend me." I tilted my head, watching the absolute terror completely consume her features. "I heard you laughing with them." Brenda turned ashen. Her knees buckled and she slid the rest of the way down the wall, collapsing into a pathetic weeping heap on the hardwood floor. The ultimate unforgivable cruelty had been caught on tape, and there was absolutely no escape from the truth. Brenda remained crumpled on the floor, the heavy silence of the ruined dining room pressing down on her like a physical weight. The polished hardwood was cool against her knees, a stark contrast to the burning flush of absolute humiliation spreading across her neck and chest. She kept her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with exaggerated theatrical sobs. For decades, tears had been her ultimate weapon, a flawless mechanism to end arguments, dodge accountability, and manipulate my father into giving her whatever she desired. She expected the sound of her weeping to magically erase the vile, venomous words that had just played from my recorder. She waited for me to kneel beside her. She waited for me to offer comfort, to succumb to the lifelong conditioning that demanded I soothe my mother's artificial distress. I did not move a single inch. I stood above her, staring down at the crown of her perfectly styled hair, feeling an overwhelming icy wave of sheer disgust. When the silence stretched on for too long, Brenda peeked through her manicured fingers. She saw my cold, unyielding expression, and the realization hit her that the old tricks were completely useless. The moral high ground had evaporated, leaving her stranded in the swamp of her own cruelty. Panic, raw and uncalculated, finally took over. Brenda scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the shards of broken porcelain and the puddles of spilled red wine staining the floor. She practically crawled toward me, her desperation turning her into a pathetic, groveling spectacle. She lunged forward, her hands closing tightly around the hem of my emerald pantsuit. "Maya, please," Brenda wailed, looking up at me with wide, panicked eyes. The expensive mascara she wore was running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. "You have to listen to me. I didn't mean any of it. It was just the alcohol talking. You know how those sorority girls are. They were egging Chloe on, and I had too much champagne. I was drunk. I was just agreeing with her to avoid a scene in public." I stared at her grasping hands, feeling the fabric of my trousers pull under her frantic grip. "You cannot do this to us," she sobbed, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. She shook my pant leg, trying desperately to force a reaction out of me. "We are your family, Maya. We are your blood. You have to save us. You cannot just throw us away over a stupid, drunken mistake. Where will we go? What will we do? You are a Christian woman. You cannot put your own mother on the street. The Lord would never forgive you for making your parents homeless." The sheer blinding audacity of her words hit me like a physical strike. She was attempting to use the sacred bond of motherhood, a bond she had willfully destroyed years ago, as a shield against her impending eviction. She was begging for the very mercy she had so effortlessly denied me. I reached down and grabbed her wrists. My grip was not gentle. I pried her fingers off my clothing, peeling her hands away from me with clinical precision. I dropped her arms and took a deliberate step backward, putting distance between myself and the toxic, suffocating aura she projected. Do not dare speak to me about putting blood on the street, I said, my voice low, vibrating with a decade of suppressed fury. Do not stand there and pretend you have any concept of what a mother owes her child. Brenda recoiled, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock. You put me on the street when I was 19 years old. I reminded her, the memory flashing behind my eyes with crystal clarity. I had finally landed a paid competitive internship at a marketing firm downtown. It was my only ticket out, my only chance to build a resume and pay for my own textbooks, because you and Thomas refused to contribute a single dime to my education. Chloe, still standing near the shattered remains of the credenza, rolled her eyes, but I kept my focus entirely locked on my mother. And then Chloe decided she wanted to go on a spontaneous 2-week vacation to Cancun with her friends. I continued, my words sharp and methodical. She bought the tickets, packed her bags, and demanded that I drop everything to stay home and babysit her aggressive, untrained dog. When I told you I could not do it, when I begged you to understand that missing 2 weeks of my internship would get me fired, you did not hesitate. Brenda looked away, her tear-stained face flushing a deeper shade of red. She remembered. They all remembered. You told me I was being a selfish, ungrateful brat, I stated, forcing her to hear the echoes of her own cruelty. You told me that Chloe needed a break, that her happiness was more important than some trivial summer job. And when I still refused, you marched upstairs, grabbed heavy-duty black garbage bags, and you packed my entire life into them. You dragged my belongings down the stairs and threw them onto the front lawn in the pouring rain. You changed the locks while I was standing on the porch. My father shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. He had watched the entire event unfold from his study window, sipping scotch and doing absolutely nothing to intervene. I slept in my beaten-up, freezing car for 3 weeks, I said, leaning forward slightly, making sure my mother absorbed every single word. I washed my face in gas station bathrooms so I could show up to that internship looking professional. I ate expired granola bars because I had no money for real food. You put your own teenage daughter on the street, exposing me to real danger, just so your golden child could go drink margaritas on a beach. You didn't care if I was safe. You didn't care if I was hungry. You threw me away like actual garbage. I straightened my posture, looking down at her with absolute final judgment. So no, Brenda, I am not putting my mother on the street. I am simply evicting a tenant who failed to pay her mortgage. Blood has absolutely nothing to do with it. The silence in the dining room stretched tight, humming with the electric charge of decades of unspoken truth finally seeing the light. I watched my mother closely, waiting for the inevitable reaction. It happened exactly as I anticipated. The tears stopped instantly. The pathetic, quivering lip vanished. The weeping, victimized mother routine completely evaporated, replaced by the vicious, calculating predator that had always resided beneath her designer exterior. Brenda stopped crying. She placed her hands flat on the hardwood floor and pushed herself up to her feet. Her movements were sharp and jerky. She brushed the invisible dust off her silk skirt, straightened her posture, and aggressively smoothed her hair back into place. When she looked up at me again, her eyes were dry, hard, and blazing with a pure, unadulterated, toxic rage. Fine. Brenda spat, her voice entirely devoid of the trembling desperation she had faked just moments before. It was cold, hateful, and sharp as shattered glass. You want to play hardball, Maya? You think you can just swoop in here with your new husband and your new money and humiliate us? You think you have won? She took a menacing step toward me, her hands balling into tight fists at her sides. If you evict us, I will destroy you, Brenda threatened, her voice a venomous hiss. I know exactly how to play this game. I will go to the church tomorrow morning. I will stand in front of the entire congregation during testimony, and I will weep. I will tell everyone who will listen that my greedy, estranged, sociopathic daughter used her newfound wealth to steal our family home. I will tell them that you are abusing your elderly, innocent parents. I will spin a story so heartbreaking, so compelling, that every single person in this town will view you as a monster. She jutted her chin forward, a cruel, triumphant smirk twisting her features. You want to be a part of high society now, Maya. You want to be respected. I will make sure your name is absolute dirt. I will ruin your reputation before you even get a chance to enjoy it. You will be a pariah in this community. Brenda did not stop there. The sheer sound of her own voice seemed to refuel her toxic energy, inflating her with a desperate, venomous sense of power. She stepped away from the wall, her expensive silk skirt swishing around her legs as she began to pace the ruined dining room. She was practically vibrating with malicious intent, charting out my destruction like a military general planning an invasion. "I will wear my modest gray dress," Brenda declared, her eyes wide and manic, as she mapped out her performance. "I will sit in the front pew at the 8 o'clock service, and I will not wear any makeup. I will wait for the perfect moment during testimony, and I will stand up before the entire congregation. I know exactly how to cry Maya. I have perfected the art of the heartbroken, long-suffering mother. I will tell them that you manipulated a banking error to illegally seize the deed to this house. I will tell them that my greedy, spiteful daughter is forcing her elderly parents and her pregnant sister out into the freezing cold just to satisfy a petty childhood grudge." She stopped pacing and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at my face. "And I will not stop at the church," Brenda sneered, her voice dropping into a harsh, guttural register. "I have the contact list from your last promotional catering mailer. I will personally call the event coordinators at the country club. I will call the mayor's office. I will tell your corporate clients that you use substandard, expired ingredients. I will tell them you treat your staff like indentured servants and that you are currently under investigation for elder abuse and corporate fraud. Your little catering empire will be bankrupt and boarded up by Friday afternoon. You will not have a single client left in this state." Thomas suddenly stood up taller, brushing off his tailored suit jacket, as if brushing off the humiliation of the past 30 minutes. Finding his courage now that his wife was weaponizing their social standing, he moved to stand beside her, presenting a united hostile front. "Your mother is right," Thomas proclaimed, his voice regaining its familiar booming arrogance. "I am a senior deacon in this community, Maya. I have spent 3 decades building an immaculate, untouchable reputation. I sit on the finance committee. I funded the new fellowship hall. When I tell Pastor Williams that you forged legal documents to steal my estate, he will not just believe me. He will rally the entire elder board against you. He will have you formally excommunicated. Do you honestly think anyone in this city will take the word of a rebellious, estranged daughter over a pillar of the community?" Chloe let out a sharp, triumphant bark of laughter. She looked down at Spencer, who was still curled in a fetal position on the Persian rug, and kicked him sharply in the ribs. "Get up, you pathetic idiot," Chloe snapped. She turned her arrogant smirk back to me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "Mom and Dad have this completely handled. The whole town is going to rally around a pregnant woman being thrown onto the street by her jealous, barren sister. You are going to be the most hated woman in the tri-state area. You played your little hand, Maya, but you lost. You always lose." I stood perfectly still in the center of the shattered dining room. I did not yell. I did not defend myself against their grotesque threats. I just watched them. I watched my mother detail her plans for calculated defamation. I watched my father leverage his sacred church standing to commit blatant perjury. I watched my sister revel in the imaginary destruction of my livelihood. I let them lay out their entire conspiracy to commit slander, character assassination, and social ruin. I let them dig their graves so incredibly deep that they would never ever be able to climb out. Then I smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was the cold, terrifying smile of a chess grandmaster who had just watched her arrogant opponent eagerly step directly into a fatal trap. Brenda's tirade faltered. Her mouth snapped shut and her eyes darted nervously toward Marcus. She expected me to be begging for mercy. The genuine amusement on my face deeply unnerved her. I reached my hand into the deep pocket of my emerald pantsuit. I bypassed my car keys and my wallet, my fingers wrapped around the smooth, heavy casing of Marcus's secondary business cell phone. I pulled the device out and held it up between us. The screen was brightly illuminated in the dimming light of the dining room. It was not displaying a recording app. It was displaying an active, ongoing group telephone call. The numbers on the call timer were steadily ticking upward, currently sitting at 45 minutes and 12 seconds. "You don't need to wait until tomorrow, Mom," I said, my voice as smooth and lethal as liquid glass. Brenda stared at the glowing screen, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. Thomas leaned forward, squinting at the device. When my acquisitions team audited Spencer's commercial lease and uncovered his offshore gambling accounts, we found something else, I explained, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my parents. We discovered that the initial capital he used to fund his illegal gambling habits was quietly siphoned directly from the church's building fund, a fund that you oversee, Dad. Thomas's face turned the color of wet ash. The arrogant posture completely collapsed. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. I knew that confronting you privately would simply result in more lies, more gaslighting, and more manipulation. I continued, holding the phone up higher. So I scheduled a remote confidential meeting with the church leadership this evening. I told them I had uncovered severe, undeniable financial irregularities regarding one of their committee members and his family. I requested that they dial into a secure conference line and listen silently while I presented the evidence. Brenda let out a small, strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on the phone screen with unadulterated horror. "Pastor Williams is on this line," I said, projecting my voice so the microphone would catch every single syllable. "Deacon Harris is on this line. Eleanor Vance, the president of the Women's Auxiliary, is on this line. The entire church elder board has been sitting on a muted conference call for the last 45 minutes. They heard Spencer confess to wire fraud. They heard Chloe wish death upon my unborn children." I locked eyes with my mother, watching her entire universe violently implode. "And they just heard you lay out a detailed step-by-step conspiracy to lie to the congregation, manipulate the pastoral staff, and destroy my business with fabricated slander." Chloe dropped her designer handbag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling her expensive makeup across the hardwood. Thomas clutched his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow, realizing his 30-year reputation had just been incinerated in a matter of seconds. Brenda was completely paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare of her own making. The social standing she valued above human life was gone forever. I tapped the screen of the phone, turning the speaker volume all the way up to its maximum setting. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only the faint hiss of static coming from the device. Then the speakerphone crackled loudly to life. Pastor Williams's deep, resonant voice echoed through the dead silence of the dining room. It was devoid of its usual pastoral warmth, replaced by a heavy, profound sorrow and a chilling, undeniable finality. "Thomas, Brenda, may God have mercy on your souls." The heavy digital silence that followed the pastor's opening statement felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. Pastor Williams did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet, absolute authority in his tone was far more devastating than any amount of shouting could ever be. He spoke with the measured, steady cadence of a man delivering a final, inescapable verdict. "We have sat here for nearly an hour," the pastor continued, his voice vibrating sharply through the small speaker of the cell phone. "We have listened in absolute horror to the darkness festering inside your home. Thomas, you stood before the congregation just last Sunday and prayed for the vulnerable. You accepted the tithes of hardworking families. You smiled and shook hands with the very people you were secretly defrauding. And yet you allowed the funds meant to serve the Lord's house to be siphoned away. You knowingly permitted church donations to fund the degenerate gambling addiction of your son-in-law." Thomas tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling wheeze escaped his throat. "And worse than the theft," Pastor Williams said, his voice actually breaking with genuine, profound emotion. "Mocking your own daughter's miscarriages, allowing such vile, demonic cruelty to be spoken under your roof without a single word of correction. I have never in my 30 years of ministry witnessed such a sickening absence of basic human decency." The pastor took a heavy breath. "You are stripped of your deacon title immediately, Thomas. The elder board has already cast the vote. It was unanimous. You are no longer welcome to serve this church in any capacity. Furthermore, we have a strict fiduciary duty to our congregation. The church's legal counsel has been notified, and the police will be contacted regarding the stolen funds." Thomas did not argue. He did not puff out his chest or threaten anyone with his team of vicious lawyers. His legs simply ceased to function. He collapsed backward, crashing heavily into his ornate dining chair. The sturdy wood groaned under his dead weight. He reached up, his trembling hands clutching the fabric of his tailored suit jacket directly over his heart. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but no sound came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his flushed cheeks, turning his skin a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. It was not a cardiac event. It was a massive, paralyzing panic attack. The great, untouchable Thomas Adams was watching his entire universe vaporize. His reputation, the immaculate public image he worshipped above his own children, was instantly and permanently eradicated. He was a fraud, a thief, and a coward, and every single person he respected now knew the exact truth. Brenda let out a guttural, terrifying shriek. She snapped out of her frozen paralysis and scrambled up from the floor, her expensive silk dress twisting around her legs. She lunged forward, her hands grasping desperately for the cell phone in my palm. I took a smooth step backward, effortlessly keeping the device out of her frantic reach, but I kept the microphone angled directly toward her face. "Pastor Williams, please!" Brenda screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You do not understand. Maya is lying. She set us up. You cannot do this to us. We have given so much money to the church. We built the new fellowship hall. Spencer is the one who stole the money, not us. We will give him to you. Just please do not punish Thomas." "You built that hall with stolen money, Brenda." The icy, unforgiving voice of Eleanor Vance snapped through the speaker. "You have been parading around the country club for years, looking down your nose at the rest of us, judging our families, while your own family stole from the collection plate. You are an absolute disgrace to this community." Brenda let out a high-pitched wail of pure agony. Knowing Eleanor Vance heard her humiliation was a fate worse than death. Eleanor was the undisputed queen of the local social scene. By tomorrow morning, every single woman at the country club, every member of the church auxiliary, and every neighbor within a 10-mile radius would know the sordid, ugly details of the Addams family's spectacular downfall. Her social life, her status among the church ladies, her immense pride all completely annihilated in an instant. "Eleanor, wait," Brenda begged, dropping to her knees once again, pressing her hands together as if in frantic prayer. She abandoned all loyalty, ready to throw anyone under the bus to save her own skin. "Please, I will pay the money back. I will empty my retirement accounts. Just keep this quiet. Do not tell the congregation. Chloe is just sick. She did not mean what she said. I will make her publicly apologize. Please, you cannot ruin my family like this." There was no sympathy waiting for her on the other end of the line. The church leadership had heard enough of the toxic manipulation. "We are praying for your salvation," Pastor Williams said, his tone utterly final and completely devoid of warmth. "But we will not shield you from the righteous consequences of your sins. Goodbye, Brenda." A sharp electronic click echoed through the dining room. The call disconnected. The screen went completely dark. Brenda stared at the blank phone in my hand, her eyes wide and unblinking. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the undeniable reality of their destruction. She had absolutely nothing left. She slowly lowered her face to the floor and began to sob uncontrollably, a pathetic broken sound that offered no comfort and demanded no sympathy. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my expression remaining completely detached. I looked around the room. Spencer was still curled into a tight ball on the Persian rug, weeping silently into his hands. Chloe stood frozen by the shattered credenza, her arrogant smirk entirely wiped away, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a woman who just realized her life of luxury was officially over. Thomas remained slumped in his chair, gasping for air as his panic attack ravaged his nervous system. They were utterly defeated. The fortress of lies they had built to protect themselves had been burned to the ground, leaving them exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. Marcus stepped forward, placing a warm, heavy hand on the small of my back. He did not say a word, but his presence was a solid, unbreakable anchor. We had executed the plan flawlessly. Every single trap had been sprung. Every single lie had been exposed. I turned to look out the large bay window at the front of the dining room. The evening sun had finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the suburban street into complete darkness. But the darkness did not last long. Suddenly, a brilliant, blinding flash of light pierced through the expensive glass panes. Red and blue, red and blue, red and The intense rhythmic flashes swept violently across the dining room walls, cutting through the shadows and illuminating the absolute devastation within. The harsh colored lights reflected off the chipped bone china, the spilled red wine, and the terrified ghostly faces of my family. The distant wailing sound of approaching sirens grew louder, tearing through the quiet suburban neighborhood and shaking the glass in the window frames. Spencer let out a strangled gasp, pressing himself flat against the floor, as if trying to merge with the rug. Chloe stumbled backward, knocking over a heavy wooden chair in her blind panic. Thomas gripped the edge of the dining table, his knuckles turning stark white as he stared out the window in sheer, unadulterated horror. The police had arrived. The heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door vibrated through the floorboards, cutting through the chaotic breathing and muffled sobs in the dining room. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the forceful, demanding strike of law enforcement. Brenda flinched violently, covering her ears as if trying to physically block out reality. Chloe backed away from the shattered credenza, her hands flying to her pregnant belly, her eyes wide with a wild, feral terror. The sheer arrogance they had possessed just minutes prior had completely evaporated. Marcus squeezed my shoulder, once a silent communication of unwavering support, before he stepped away. He navigated through the debris of the ruined dinner, his strides calm and purposeful, and pulled open the heavy oak front door. The flashing red and blue lights spilled into the grand foyer, casting long, menacing shadows across the polished walls. 3 uniformed police officers stepped over the threshold, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Behind them walked a man in a crisp dark suit holding a leather folder. His demeanor was chillingly calm, completely unaffected by the opulent surroundings or the shattered family cowering inside. He was an FBI agent. The 4 men moved past Marcus, entering the dining room with absolute authority. They took in the scene, the smashed porcelain, the spilled wine looking like blood on the Persian rug, Brenda weeping on the floor, and Thomas slumped in his chair gasping for air. The lead FBI agent did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask what had happened to the room. His eyes swept over the cowering figures with clinical precision until they locked onto the man huddled on the floor. "Spencer Hastings," the agent asked, his voice cutting through the room like a steel blade. Spencer let out a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. He tried to push himself further back, but he was already pressed flush against the wall. He looked up, his face slick with sweat and tears, his expensive designer shirt wrinkled and stained. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the FBI agent stated, stepping forward and opening his leather folder. "You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. "No, you cannot take my husband. We are wealthy. We belong to the country club. He is innocent." She lunged toward the officers, but one of the uniformed cops simply held up a stern hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Ma'am, step back," the officer commanded, brooking absolutely no argument. "Do not interfere." Spencer did not try to comfort his hysterical wife. He did not try to maintain his dignity or ask for a lawyer with the quiet confidence of a falsely accused man. Instead, the polished, arrogant facade he had worn for years evaporated completely, revealing the spineless, sniveling coward underneath. Spencer scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up defensively. He did not look at the FBI agent. He looked directly at my father. "It was him!" Spencer shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger right at Thomas's face. "I did not do this alone. He gave me the money. He knew exactly what I was doing. He approved the transfers from the church accounts. Arrest him too." Thomas's panic attack vanished instantly, replaced by a surge of pure, blinding fury. The man who had just been gasping for air, seemingly on the verge of collapse, shot up from his dining chair with terrifying speed. His face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. The narcissistic injury of being betrayed by his own accomplice was too much to bear. "You ungrateful, lying parasite!" Thomas roared, saliva flying from his lips. He lunged across the dining room, kicking broken plates out of his way. "I gave you everything I covered for your miserable failures to protect my family name, and this is how you repay me. You dare accuse me in my own home." "Arrest him!" Spencer screamed at the police officers, backing away from his enraged father-in-law. "He is the deacon. He had the access codes, he helped me launder it to save Chloe from embarrassment. He is just as guilty as I am. I will kill you, Thomas bellowed. The illusion of high society elegance shattered completely. The two men who had spent years looking down their noses at everyone else suddenly threw themselves at each other like rabid animals. Thomas grabbed Spencer by the collar of his shirt, slamming him hard against the wall. A framed portrait of the family crashed to the floor, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. Spencer retaliated, swinging a wild, clumsy fist that connected with Thomas's jaw. It was a pathetic, ugly brawl. The wealthy, respectable patriarch and the golden son-in-law tearing each other apart in the ruins of their own home. I watched them with clinical detachment. I had not laid a single finger on them. I had simply held up a mirror, forced them to look at their own hideous reflections, and let them destroy themselves. The police officers reacted instantly. Two of the uniformed cops charged forward, grabbing Thomas by the shoulders and pulling him forcefully backward, pinning his arms to his sides. The third officer tackled Spencer. The impact sent Spencer crashing onto the hardwood floor, right into a puddle of spilled wine. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted, driving his knee sharply into Spencer's back. Spencer writhed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the officer forcefully grabbed his wrists and wrenched them behind his back. The cold metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the dining room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Brenda was screaming hysterically, covering her face as she watched her husband being restrained and her son-in-law being cuffed. Chloe sank to her knees, clutching her stomach, crying out Spencer's name, but he did not even look at her. He just kept crying, his face pressed against the wet floor, begging the officers to listen to him, begging them to take Thomas instead. They dragged Spencer to his feet. His designer clothes were ruined. His dignity was non-existent. The FBI agent calmly read him his Miranda rights, his voice steady and uninterested in the dramatic theatrics of the Addams family. Marcus moved to stand right beside me, wrapping his arms securely around my waist. We watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. The officers began to march Spencer toward the front door, pulling the sobbing, broken man out of the dining room and into the flashing lights of the police cruisers waiting outside. Chloe scrambled after them, wailing, completely ignoring my presence as she chased the ruins of her fake, perfect life out the door. The room suddenly grew dangerously quiet. Brenda's hysterical sobs reduced to wet, ragged gasps. The two remaining officers slowly released their grip on Thomas. My father stood in the center of the room, panting heavily, his suit torn, his jaw bruising from Spencer's desperate punch. He straightened his jacket with shaking hands, desperately trying to summon whatever shreds of his ruined authority remained. He looked at the lead police officer, attempting to muster an air of indignant respectability, ready to demand an apology for the disturbance. But the lead officer did not step back. He did not lower his guard. He simply adjusted his utility belt, his expression hardening as he locked his gaze onto my father. "Thomas Addams," the officer said, his voice entirely devoid of respect. "We also need you to come down to the station regarding the missing funds from the First Baptist Church." Thomas did not fight back. The fight had been completely drained out of him the second the pastor's voice had echoed from the phone. He simply nodded, his shoulders sagging, looking 20 years older than he had when I first walked into this dining room. The officers flanked him, guiding him out the front door without a shred of the deference he was accustomed to receiving. Brenda did not try to follow him. She remained a crumpled, sobbing heap on the floor, rocking back and forth, entirely consumed by the absolute destruction of her social standing. The heavy oak door closed with a firm, resounding thud, shutting out the flashing red and blue lights. The sudden quiet in the house was deafening. I turned my attention to Chloe. She was standing near the overturned dining chair, her hands gripping the edges of the shattered credenza for physical support. The flawless, arrogant pageant queen facade was entirely gone. Her expensive blowout was tangled and frizzy from her frantic pacing. Her designer mascara had run down her face, creating dark, ugly streaks across her pale cheeks. She looked wildly around the room, as if waiting for a servant to appear and clean up the mess, or for her father to stride back in and fix everything with his checkbook. But no one was coming. The reality of her situation began to crash down on her in brutal, suffocating waves. Spencer was gone, likely facing years in federal prison. Her father was being investigated for embezzlement. The church, their primary source of social power and stolen income, had excommunicated them. The bank accounts would be frozen by morning. She had absolutely no money of her own. She had never worked a day in her life. She had no home, no husband, and her pristine reputation was vaporized. Chloe looked at her mother, who was still catatonic on the rug, useless and broken. Then her wide, terrified eyes locked onto me. I stood tall beside Marcus, wearing the emerald pantsuit she had mocked just an hour ago. I was the owner of the house she was standing in. I was the CEO of a company she had tried to belittle. I was the only person left in the room who possessed a shred of power, wealth, or stability. The transformation was as grotesque as it was pathetic. The vicious, sneering predator vanished instantly, replaced by a groveling, desperate beggar. Chloe let out a high-pitched, trembling sob and stumbled forward. Her knees hit the hardwood floor, ignoring the scattered shards of broken porcelain. She crawled toward me, her hands reaching out in a frantic, unhinged display of supplication. She threw herself at my feet, her fingers desperately clawing at the fabric of my trousers. "Maya, please!" Chloe wailed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You cannot do this to me! I am pregnant! I am your little sister!" I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, just a cold, clinical detachment. "My husband is gone," Chloe sobbed, shaking my leg, begging for a reaction. "Spencer is going to jail, and Mom and Dad are ruined. The accounts are going to be frozen. I have absolutely nothing left. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to raise this baby?" She looked up at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She actually believed her own victimhood. She believed that despite years of tormenting me, she was still entitled to my salvation. "Please, Maya, you have a giant house," Chloe begged, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a rapid, desperate stream. "I know about the estate you and Marcus bought in the hills. It has 6 bedrooms. Let me stay with you. I can move into one of the guest wings. I will stay out of your way. I swear I just need a place to live until Spencer gets out. I am your blood. You have to help me." I stared down at her grasping hands. I thought about the night she had demanded I abandon my internship to babysit her dog. I thought about the laughter in her voice when my mother threw my belongings onto the wet lawn. I thought about the sheer delight on her face earlier this evening when she suggested I would die a barren, unloved spinster. I reached down, grabbed her wrists, and forcefully peeled her fingers off my clothing. I stepped back, severing the physical connection completely. "I wouldn't let you sleep on my welcome mat," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical sobs like a razor. Chloe recoiled, her mouth falling open in shock. "You spent your entire life telling me I was worthless." I continued, my words methodical and sharp. "You told me to stop being lazy. You told me to pull myself up by my bootstraps. Well, Chloe, now is your chance. You can go stay at a shelter, or you can get a job, like you always told me to do. It is time for you to enter the real world." Chloe shook her head violently, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, no, you cannot mean that. We are family. We share DNA." I corrected her, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "Family protects each other. Family does not steal, lie, and pray for each other's downfall. I am building a family of my own now, Chloe, and my babies will never know their toxic aunt. You are dead to me." The absolute finality in my voice struck her like a physical blow. She slumped back onto her heels, her sobbing abruptly cutting off as the sheer, suffocating truth of her isolation finally took hold. She was entirely alone. Before Chloe could formulate another desperate plea, heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded on the front porch. The front door, which Marcus had left slightly ajar, was pushed wide open. A team of 4 men stepped into the grand foyer. They wore matching gray uniforms with a corporate logo stitched over the breast pockets. They were carrying large, heavy-duty cardboard boxes, rolls of packing tape, and industrial garbage bags. They moved with silent professional efficiency, stepping past the ruined dining room and waiting for instructions. Chloe scrambled backward, her eyes darting between the moving crew and Marcus. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are they doing here?" Marcus stepped forward. He did not look at my mother, who was still weeping silently on the floor. He locked his cold, unwavering gaze directly onto Chloe. He raised his left arm and checked his expensive watch with deliberate precision. "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack whatever fits in 2 suitcases," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with absolute unshakable authority. "Everything else belongs to the holding company now." The sheer gravity of Marcus's decree hung suspended in the chilled air of the dining room. A full, agonizing second ticked by before the absolute reality of the 30-minute deadline registered. Then pure, unadulterated pandemonium erupted. The 4 men from the moving crew immediately fanned out, taking up positions at the base of the stairs and the hallway entrances. They stood with their arms crossed, transforming instantly into silent, emotionless sentinels, hired to enforce the ticking clock. Brenda let out a high, keening shriek. She scrambled off the floor, completely ignoring her hyperventilating husband, and sprinted toward the grand staircase. She took the steps 2 at a time, her expensive silk dress tearing at the seam. I listened to her frantic, heavy footsteps thudding across the upstairs hallway as she rushed toward the master suite. She was not grabbing winter coats, practical shoes, or important financial documents. She was desperately trying to salvage her fractured identity. When she reappeared at the top of the landing a few minutes later to drag a suitcase into the hall, I could see exactly what she was prioritizing. She was frantically shoving wide-brimmed church hats, velvet fascinators, and limited edition designer handbags into the luggage. She was trying to cram rigid, bulky luxury items into a confined space, weeping loudly as the expensive materials bent and snapped under her desperate, careless force. She was clinging to the very status symbols that had just been rendered completely worthless. Downstairs, Thomas refused to participate in the packing. The lead police officer repeated the instruction for him to step outside and travel to the precinct, but Thomas simply backed away until the back of his knees hit the velvet living room sofa. He collapsed onto the cushions, shaking his head in a violent rhythm of total denial. He clutched his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow, muttering to himself. He kept repeating that this was a massive misunderstanding, that he was a senior deacon, that he was personal friends with the bank manager, and that his lawyer would fix everything by morning. He was utterly paralyzed by his own shattered ego, choosing to hyperventilate on the couch rather than gather a single item of clothing for his impending eviction. Chloe's reaction was entirely different. The pampered, arrogant golden child had immediately shifted into a frantic, feral survival mode. She completely bypassed the expensive luggage sets stored in the hall closet. Instead, she sprinted into the massive chef's kitchen and began tearing open cabinets with reckless abandon until she found a heavy cardboard box of industrial black garbage bags. The irony was incredibly thick, almost poetic in its execution. I watched my sister rip a plastic bag from the roll and waddle as fast as her pregnant belly would allow up the grand staircase. She rushed into her sprawling childhood bedroom and simply started raking clothing off the velvet hangers. She indiscriminately shoved pristine silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and sequined pageant gowns into the black trash bags. She was packing her entire life into garbage bags, exactly the way Brenda had packed up my belongings when they threw me out into the freezing rain all those years ago. While the house devolved into a symphony of tearing plastic, heavy footsteps, and muffled weeping, Marcus and I retreated to the periphery. I walked slowly over to the shattered remains of the dining table. Miraculously, 2 crystal wine glasses had survived Chloe's earlier tantrum, still half filled with the expensive deep red Cabernet. I picked them both up, handing one to Marcus. We moved to the grand entryway, leaning comfortably against the polished mahogany doorframe. We stood quietly by the door, completely unbothered by the chaos unfolding around us. We did not shout orders. We did not gloat or hurl insults up the stairs. We simply stood in silence, sipping the rich, full-bodied wine, watching my abusers systematically dismantle their own lives. The contrast was stark and deeply satisfying. On one side of the foyer was a family built entirely on lies, manipulation, and stolen funds, now scrambling like cornered rats as their foundation collapsed. On the other side stood Marcus and I, a united front of absolute stability, genuine wealth, and unwavering loyalty. The heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway counted down the remaining minutes. When there were only 5 minutes left, the lead mover checked his clipboard and called out a loud, booming warning that echoed up the staircase. A moment later, Brenda came stumbling down the stairs. She was dragging an oversized leather suitcase that would not properly zip shut. A sleeve of a pink silk blouse was caught in the metal teeth trailing behind her on the stairs. She was clutching two crushed, deformed hat boxes under her arms, her knuckles white from the strain. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, her eyes swollen and red, her perfectly styled hair sticking up in frantic directions. She looked entirely unhinged. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. She dropped the heavy suitcase. It hit the marble floor with a loud, resounding thud that echoed through the foyer. She did not look at the moving crew or the police officers waiting by the door. She looked directly across the wide expanse of the entryway, her gaze locking onto me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, maintaining direct eye contact. In that single moment, the frantic panic in Brenda's eyes faded, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. The grand illusion finally broke. She looked at my impeccably tailored suit, Marcus's calm, protective stance, and the sheer, unbothered serenity radiating from us. For the very first time in her entire life, Brenda did not see the vulnerable scapegoat she could bully into submission. She saw a powerful, untouchable woman who had completely outmaneuvered her at every single turn. Brenda's shoulders slumped, the realization crushing the last remaining breath of defiance out of her lungs. "You planned this perfectly," Brenda whispered, her voice hollow and devoid of any lingering pride. "You destroyed us." I slowly lowered my wine glass. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for decades, feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure. "I didn't destroy you," I replied, my voice steady, carrying the calm, absolute weight of the undeniable truth. "I just stopped shielding you from the consequences of your own actions. You handed me the matches, I just lit the fire." The 30 minutes evaporated with terrifying speed. It was a chaotic, humiliating blur of tearing plastic, panicked footsteps, and breathless weeping. Brenda scrambled frantically around the foyer, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was still paralyzed on the velvet sofa. She lunged for her scattered belongings, desperately trying to shove crushed designer hat boxes and heavily branded purses into a leather suitcase that simply would not close. The expensive zipper snapped under the pressure, spilling a cascade of silk scarves onto the hardwood floor. She wailed, dropping to her knees to gather the colorful fabric like a desperate child hoarding candy. Chloe fared no better. She came trudging down the grand staircase, her breath ragged and heavy. She was dragging two enormous industrial black garbage bags behind her. The plastic stretched and tore against the sharp edges of the stairs, leaving a trail of dropped designer shoes and tangled pearl necklaces in her wake. She looked absolutely ridiculous, a former pageant queen hauling literal trash bags filled with the crumpled remains of her wardrobe. She reached the bottom step and collapsed against the banister, clutching her pregnant belly, sobbing openly as the reality of her destitution finally paralyzed her. Through it all, Thomas remained completely motionless. He sat frozen on the living room sofa, his hands gripping his knees, taking rapid, shallow breaths that rattled loudly in his chest. He refused to pack a single item. He simply stared blankly at the wall, his mind entirely unable to process the total collapse of his kingdom. Marcus and I did not move from our spot by the doorway. We stood in absolute silence, finishing the last drops of the deep red wine, watching the frantic, pathetic scramble of a family that had spent decades pretending they were better than everyone else. The sheer indignity of the scene was a masterpiece they had painted entirely by themselves. Marcus raised his wrist, checking his watch with a fluid, deliberate motion. "Time," he announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. The four men from the moving crew stepped forward instantly. They did not offer assistance. They did not show an ounce of sympathy. They moved with mechanical efficiency, forming a physical barrier that directed the three broken figures toward the front entrance. "No, wait, please," Brenda pleaded, scrambling to her feet and clutching an overflowing armful of purses. "I just need to get my jewelry box from the master suite. Please, it has my mother's pearls." "The time has expired," the lead security guard stated flatly, stepping directly into her path and gesturing toward the open doorway. "You need to vacate the premises immediately." One of the other guards walked over to the living room and placed a firm, unyielding hand on Thomas's shoulder. My father flinched as if he had been burned. He looked up, his face ashen, his eyes vacant. The guard simply pulled him to his feet, ignoring the man's ragged hyperventilation, and guided him toward the foyer. They were herded out the door like trespassers. Chloe dragged her torn garbage bags across the threshold, weeping hysterically. Brenda stumbled blindly, dropping a silk scarf and leaving it behind on the marble floor. Thomas shuffled forward like a condemned prisoner walking to the gallows. They stumbled down the grand stone steps and out onto the manicured front lawn. The cool night air hit them instantly, carrying a sharp, biting chill. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were gone, having already carried Spencer away to a federal holding cell, but the neighborhood was anything but asleep. The sudden commotion, the screaming, the police sirens had acted like an alarm bell for the entire suburban enclave. Porch lights illuminated the darkness up and down the wealthy street. Expensive silk curtains twitched, blinds parted slightly. The neighbors, the country club elite, the church board members, the very people Brenda had spent her entire life trying to impress, were now a silent, judging audience. They were watching the high and mighty Addams family, standing on their wet grass, surrounded by garbage bags and broken luggage. Brenda noticed the glowing porch lights across the street. She let out a strangled gasp and immediately tried to hide her face behind a crushed velvet fascinator, shrinking into herself as the sheer agonizing humiliation burned through her veins. Chloe dropped her trash bags onto the damp grass, wrapping her arms around herself, shivering uncontrollably. Thomas just stared blankly at the expensive imported sod beneath his feet. I stepped out onto the elevated porch, looking down at them. Marcus stood firmly at my side, his presence a solid wall of protection. I looked at the three miserable figures shivering in the dark, stripped of their money, their status, and their pride. Brenda looked up at me, her face a ruined mess of mascara and tears. She still held on to a tiny, desperate shred of hope that this was just a harsh lesson, that I would eventually relent and let them back inside. Maya, Brenda sobbed, her voice trembling in the cold air. What are we supposed to do? You have made your point. Please. I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had watched me suffer and cheered for my failures. My expression remained entirely carved from ice. This house will be bulldozed next week, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet lawn, loud enough for the nearest neighbors to hear. Brenda gasped, her eyes widening in pure horror. Thomas's head snapped up, his vacant stare suddenly filled with fresh, agonizing shock. I am building a community center for single mothers on this exact piece of land. I continued, savoring the absolute devastation washing over their faces. It will be a safe haven for women who actually need support, funded entirely by the sale of your precious country club assets. My children will never step foot on this cursed soil. I am erasing every trace of your existence from this neighborhood. A man in a dark jacket stepped out from the shadows of the porch. He was a professional locksmith Marcus had hired earlier in the day. Without a word, he approached the heavy mahogany front doors. He pulled a heavy-duty drill from his tool bag and immediately pressed it against the ornate brass deadbolt. The loud metallic grinding sound echoed violently through the quiet suburban street. He was boring out the locks right in front of their eyes. The finality of the sound broke whatever was left of them. Brenda dropped her ruined hats onto the grass and buried her face in her hands, wailing into the night. Chloe fell to her knees beside her garbage bag, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from the home he had worshipped above his own flesh and blood. Marcus wrapped his strong arms securely around my waist, pulling me gently against his side. The warmth of his touch was a stark contrast to the freezing reality we were leaving behind. Let's go home, Marcus murmured, his voice incredibly gentle, meant only for me. We turned our backs on the screaming, crying family. We did not offer a single backward glance. We walked together down the cobblestone pathway, our strides perfectly synchronized, moving away from the wreckage and toward the sleek black Maybach, waiting patiently at the curb. The driver immediately stepped out, opening the rear door with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush heated leather seat, and Marcus settled in right beside me. The heavy door closed, instantly sealing out the sound of Brenda's hysterical wailing. The cabin of the car was quiet, safe, and immaculate. The powerful engine purred to life. The Maybach pulled smoothly away from the curb, gliding effortlessly down the affluent street. I turned my head and looked directly into the side mirror. I watched the illuminated porch of the grand empty house shrink into the distance. I watched the three pathetic shivering figures standing on the lawn amidst their garbage bags, completely destroyed by their own greed. I kept my eyes locked on the mirror as the car accelerated, watching the toxic ghosts of my past grow smaller and smaller until they finally disappeared completely into the dark. The darkness swallowed them whole, sealing that chapter of my life forever. 6 months passed. The frantic screaming chaos of that final night was replaced by a profound, unbreakable tranquility. I sat on the plush cream-colored sofa in the sunroom of our estate, the morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view overlooked the rolling green hills and a private shimmering lake. There were no chipped porcelain plates here. There were no venomous whispers echoing through the hallways. There was only the soft hum of the central air, the smell of fresh lavender, and the gentle warmth of the sun resting on my skin. I rested my hands on my swollen belly, feeling the strong, rhythmic kicks of the twins growing inside me. I was heavily pregnant, glowing with a health and vitality I had never possessed while living under my parents' roof. Marcus walked into the room carrying 2 mugs of herbal tea. He looked incredibly handsome in his casual morning clothes, his face relaxed and entirely free of the tension we had carried during the corporate takeover. He handed me a mug, pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, and sat in the armchair across from me. He picked up his tablet, scrolling through his morning emails. His legal team had been keeping tabs on the fallout, ensuring all remaining assets from the holding company were properly liquidated and secure. The final sentencing came down this morning, Marcus said, his voice calm, breaking the quiet of the sunroom. I took a slow sip of my tea. For Spencer, 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole, Marcus confirmed, setting the tablet on his knee. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and a string of other financial crimes. He tried to throw Thomas under the bus to get a reduced sentence, but the paper trail led directly back to his own offshore accounts. I nodded, feeling no satisfaction, just a clinical understanding of justice. And Thomas, he managed to avoid a jail cell barely, Marcus replied. The church board agreed not to press criminal charges if he provided full restitution of the stolen funds. It took every single asset he had left. He had to sell his vintage Mercedes, liquidate his meager retirement accounts, and empty his emergency funds. He is completely bankrupt. Marcus took a sip of his tea before delivering the final piece of news. He found a job. He is working as a night shift janitor at a public high school 2 towns over. It was the only place that would hire him after the country club scandal became public knowledge. The great Thomas Adams, a man who had built his entire identity on looking down his nose at the working class, was now mopping floors in the middle of the night just to afford groceries. What about Brenda and Chloe? I asked, my voice completely detached, as if asking about the weather in a city I would never visit. They found a cheap, cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of town, Marcus said, scrolling down to the next report. Without Spencer's stolen money or Thomas's income, they are struggling. Chloe had the baby, a boy. From what the private investigator gathered, the living situation is a nightmare. Brenda and Chloe are constantly screaming at each other. The walls are paper thin, and the neighbors have called the police twice for noise complaints. Without their wealth to buffer their personalities, they are tearing each other apart. A 1-bedroom apartment. Brenda, who needed a walk-in closet just for her church hats, and Chloe, who refused to wear the same designer dress twice, trapped together in a tiny, dingy space. They were suffocating in the toxic environment they had spent their entire lives perfecting. I did not smile. I did not laugh or gloat over their misery. Gloating required anger, and I had absolutely none left to give. I simply felt an overwhelming, profound sense of relief. I placed both hands back onto my stomach. Marcus watched me, his eyes softening with an immense protective love. We had done it. We had severed the infected roots of my family tree. They are gone, Marcus whispered, leaning forward to rest his hand over mine on my belly. They can never touch us again. I know, I said, a genuine peaceful smile finally breaking across my face. The generational curse was officially broken. My twins would be born into a world of immense generational wealth. Yes, but that was the least important thing we were giving them. They would be born into a home overflowing with unconditional love, emotional safety, and absolute peace. They would never know the sting of being a scapegoat. They would never be pitted against each other for parental affection. They would never know the toxic, manipulative aunt or the cruel, narcissistic grandparents who had tried to break their mother. They would only know support. They would only know a mother who fought a war to ensure their environment was pure, and a father who stood like an impenetrable fortress, protecting them from the outside world. As I looked out over the pristine lake, the reality of my journey settled over me like a warm blanket. For years I believed I had to earn my place at a table that was built to exclude me. I believed my worth was tied to my ability to endure their cruelty without breaking. But endurance is not a virtue when you are enduring abuse. Walking away is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Knowing your worth means understanding when a room no longer serves you, even if that room is filled with your own blood relatives. It means having the courage to look at the people who gave you life and realizing they do not have the right to drain it from you. You have to cut the dead weight. You have to sever the ties that drag you into the mud, no matter how much society tells you that family is forever. Toxic is toxic. I used to dream of proving them wrong, of screaming my success in their faces until they were forced to respect me. But the truth is far simpler and far more beautiful. The sweetest revenge is not destruction. It is not anger or retaliation. The sweetest revenge is moving on. It is building a life so incredibly successful, so deeply fulfilling, and so wonderfully peaceful that the people who tried to break you become nothing more than a faded, insignificant memory. I did not have to destroy them. I just had to step out of the way and let them destroy themselves. I leaned my head against Marcus's shoulder, closed my eyes, and let the morning sun wash over me. The war was over. I had won.